Good evening. Good evening, councilors. We are joined here by Director Hediger, who is here to talk about, a workshop on bees or chickens. I don't know which one's first, but please proceed, Director.
All right, we can start with chickens, I guess. So we talked about this, or we've talked about on this two separate occasions. Chickens came to you folks first. I believe like a month later, there was a concern about bees. And after the outcome of both of those, the council basically said, what do we think the community wants? So I worked with Dottie. She put something on the city's website. Basically a survey of questions as to what are people's intents or feelings about keeping bees and chickens. So starting with chickens, we got, 100 so responses. The questions that were asked are, let me back up. As a reminder, you're only allowed to have up to 6 female chickens on 30,000 square foot lots in 5 zoning districts: rural ag, low density residential, suburban residential, medium density residential, and neighborhood conservation A. So those are all basically single family zoning districts. We asked the question, are you in favor of reducing the lot size to 20,000? Are you in favor of reducing the lot size to 10,000? Are you not interested in changing it at all? And then would you also like to see the keeping of chickens applied to other fowl as well? So those are the questions that we asked. Basically, the memo summarizes the responses as well as some of the additional comments that we got back. But at the end of the day, the consensus from that survey was that we should basically be looking at reducing lot sizes to 10,000 square feet, and then maybe consider allowing other fowl to smaller lots as well. So at this point, staff's recommending for you folks to provide us direction as to whether or not we want to go to 20,000 or 10,000, but clearly there was a consensus out of those people that did respond to reduce the lot size to something less than 30. I would suggest that we keep it at 6 roosters. 6 roosters. Don't do 6 roosters. I already got 6 roosters on Boston Avenue, apparently. 6 female chickens, no roosters. Everyone at home, no roosters, no roosters. Continue the setback for chicken coops for 20 feet from the property line. You don't need to have a chicken coop right on the property line. If you have a large enough lot, even if you have a 10,000 square foot lot, you ought to be able to keep this setback a little bit. I mean, chickens do make some noise and they do have some odor, but I don't know why you need to have it right on the property line. Eliminate the need to get a use permit and associated fence permit for it. Quite frankly, I think we've seen maybe 1 or 2 permits since we adopted a chicken ordinance a number of years ago for people that do have chickens to actually get a chicken coop or a fence permit. I liken it to dog houses. People do not come to us to get permits for dog houses. You folks recently adopted changes for sheds for residential, that if it's a shed of 200 square feet or less, you don't have to get a permit from us as long as it's 5 feet from the property line. So this is more of a performance standard. Keep your chicken coop 20 feet from the property line, have 6 female chickens and no roosters, and life should be good. As far as the other fowl, whether or not we should investigate having other fowl fall under these same parameters. Right now, the ordinance references ducks, geese, guineas, pigeons, emus, ostriches, rheas, turkeys, I don't even know what that is, and pheasants, and peasants.
Those two.
Yeah. Wendell Stroud is here tonight, the animal control officer. You folks might have some questions for him as well. Don't make me laugh. So he may have some input into that as well, but talking with him briefly, we should limit it to chickens at this point. I mean, we already have our challenges with chickens. Do we really want to open this up to other birds? Probably not. You're killing me. So those are the recommendations from staff at this point. I don't know if we want to stop at chickens and then maybe move on to bees, but the thought at this point is to get some guidance from you folks so then we can prepare amendments for a public hearing for the council to consider. I should add, I think you folks were copied on a letter from the Good Food Council as well. There may be somebody here tonight that may want to speak to that. But they had some recommendations in there, both with respect to bees and chickens as well. Their square footage requirements were less than the 10,000. They were looking to do it on a ratio, basically a certain amount of square footage per bird. They also looked at reducing the setbacks even further for chicken coops out there. And I'll hold off on the bee discussion until we get done with the chickens. So, looking for some guidance.
Comments from the councilors? All right, Councilor McCarthy.
Good evening, Director. My feeling, I like all of your recommendations, the staff's recommendations. I would like to limit it to the 20,000 square feet, though. I think 10,000 is too small. And also, if we're gonna open it up to a 20,000 square foot lot, I don't think we need to limit it as far as where within the city. I think we could open it up to the rest of the zoning, but I think that only if we keep it at the 20,000 square feet. Thank you.
Councilor LaChapelle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Director Hediger, I'd like the recommendations also. I'd like to see it go down to 10,000 square feet, but just keep it in a single residential. Should not be in the apartment house. You have apartment houses, some of them that have larger lots, and that's just asking for troubles with tenants and all that good stuff. So I'd like to see it down to 10,000 square feet. And the requirements is going to have a chicken coop, but is it going to be a fenced-in area for the chickens?
Yes.
It cannot be free range.
Correct. The current provisions, you have a copy of the current provisions in your packet, and we're not looking to change anything like that. They would
Okay.
still have to be in a fenced-in area.
I was just looking at the recommendations, so it's
Yep,
definitely
that's not a
fenced in.
change. We would keep them in
So
a
the
fenced-in
coop,
area.
is the fenced-in area considered the coop, or is just the building considered the coop? What is considered the coop?
I know I would call the coop the structure itself. The fenced-in area would actually be a run, but let me see how we've worded that in the existing language.
So if I had my coop 20 feet from the lot line, the fenced-in area could go close to my lot line? Or what is the,
I just need to remind myself how this is worded. Chicken hen houses, fenced areas, and enclosures may not be closer than 20 feet. So that includes both the run area and the coop itself. And that's existing language now. Chickens must be kept in fenced-in area or enclosed at all times. Enclosures must be free, must be clean, dry, odor-free, kept sanitary.
what's the required setback for a shed?
So, again, the new language is 5 feet if it's 200 square feet or less.
What's the setback on a structure? It's 50 feet?
Depends on what zoning your
Home,
district.
okay.
What
But
zoning.
in these zones that we're looking at, it's probably 25 feet?
Not necessarily. In the NCA, it's 10 feet. In the suburban residential, it might be 20. Rural ag is 25. I'd have to check on the other ones.
So if we're going in the fenced-in area, consider that on I just assume see it go down to 10 feet. 10 feet, 10,000 square feet. That would be my suggestion. But again, this is the council talking about it. So, that's it. Thank you.
Councilor Pease.
Well, my question is now I go in and I say, okay, I want to put a shed in, and it's only have to be 5 feet. If I convert that to a chicken coop, do I have to move it?
Yes.
No, I didn't see anywhere would you do something, how would you let them know that they'd have to do that?
Right now, it would be the owner's responsibility to know what those standards are. So likewise, if they, no different than right now with the shed permit, or excuse me, the shed setback. Somebody gets a shed, they either need to think to ask the city how close can I put that to the property line depending upon the square footage, or they put it in the right location, they get lucky. So same idea with the chicken coop. They would hopefully think to ask the community, hey, can I have chickens? Yeah, you sure. How close can I put these to the property line? Well, it's 20 feet. They may raise the point that you and Councilor LaChapelle just raised is, so chicken coop has to be 20 feet, but my shed can be 5 feet?
Yeah.
That's what we're discussing right now.
I like keeping the into single-family residential. And 20,000, 10,000, I'd be happy to compromise at 15. I think that's a good balance between the two. But that's my opinion. And I thank you.
Counselor Clement.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm looking at the staff's recommendations. I don't have any problem with them. I think 20,000, I think 10. I say go smaller in steps if we're going to go smaller. I don't think we want to start bringing in all the other fowl that are enumerated here. I think there's going to have to be an education period for people to realize they've got to have a permit to have chickens. But other than that, I think that would solve the issue that came before us. I realize that I don't disagree with the councilor from Ward 4 on lot size, but there can be a certain amount of annoyance there. I read the recommendations from the Good Food Council, and we could get into an awful mess with some of those ordinances that are out there, so many birds per square foot and stuff like that. I find that to be totally unmanageable. I think this is nice and concise, and I don't see why it wouldn't work. Allow them to have up to 6, reduce the lot size, setbacks. I think 20 feet is reasonable. There's a certain amount of noise and odor with chickens regardless. So.
Just to be clear, Counselor, unless I misunderstood, we're talking about eliminating the need for any type of permit. Right now, you would need a permit, and we're saying eliminate the need for a permit.
Well, I don't have a problem with that. I mean, education as to what they can do, and then I see where you're not going to be enforcing this anymore anyway, so unless we change it back.
No, we would, the zoning section falls under.
Zoning, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I guess basically I'm in favor of the staff's recommendations on it. And 20,000 should be sufficient from where I stand. Oh, in the spirit of cooperation, 15,000 short.
15. Bob, would you go? I'm sorry.
Counselors, thank you. Counselor Scott.
Thank you. So I would agree with, I agree with the staff recommendations as well. I am comfortable with the 15. I don't see, I mean, we'll hear if it's, I would assume that those that are gonna get chickens are gonna know and be comfortable and figure out how they're gonna do it on their property, and if they think that we would hear if it was either a nuisance and it can be changed in the future if that became the case, correct? I would hate to do that.
Similar to why we're
but-
here right now.
Yeah. And I would agree that I'm not sure that we should be adding the other fowl at this point in that small area. I know somebody that has emus and ostriches. I think it's up in Vinyl Haven, someplace up, and they are allowed, and I wouldn't want anything like that on that type of, not at this point. And I do want to say that I appreciate the Good Food Council sending us some of their recommendations and looking at this also. I really appreciated that, so, thank you.
Yeah, I don't think that we should be making any changes to the ordinance. I'm concerned that this will just drive up calls to the city as people get chickens, and then, yes, we could always change it in the future. However, at that point, it becomes a tough conversation if people already have chickens and now they're in a spot where they can't have them, etc. I'm concerned about noise, odor, and just general nuisance. I realize I'm in the minority here.
So,
Councilor LaChapelle?
Mr. Mayor, just so we can get to the bees real quick and move it along, I know we're in a tight schedule. I've heard 1, 2, 3. Linda, were you at 4 for 15, going to 15? So we're pretty much at a consensus for 15,000 square feet, not 20, not 10, 15? I'm just trying to get a feeling of it, and then everything else, just using staff recommendation for everything else? You okay with that?
So
Director Hediger, are you all set with chickens?
I am all set with chickens. So I will make those changes and work with administration to get that on an upcoming schedule for you folks or public hearing. Bees. This, to Councilor Clement's point, actually is not enforced by planning and code enforcement, even though we do get the phone calls. And then in speaking with Wendell Strout, it doesn't seem like we get very many bee complaints to begin with, so this is somewhat uncharted territory for both of us. Again, we did a similar survey with Dottie's help, getting it online. And the questions we asked are we in favor of reducing the distance of hives that may be located in proximity to a neighboring property or not reducing it? As a reminder, right now, it's written that hives need to be located 100 feet away from any inhabited dwelling other than the person that's keeping the bees. And that's exactly how this came to our attention, is we had a property owner in a single-family district who was keeping bees. And initially, the hive was closer than 100 feet to the abutting property structure. And it's not the property line, it's the structure on the abutting property. They since moved that, so the hive meets that 100-foot setback, but there were still concerns about the keeping of bees next door. The response is basically, I mean, it was, we got 104 responses, and 54 of them said reduce it, and 50 of them said not to. So we're right in the middle as to what should we be doing with that. So at this point, staff's recommendations is that our ordinance is already consistent with best management practices with respect to lot size and number of colonies. There was a woman here at the last time that we talked about that. I'm not sure if she handed that sheet out to everybody, but basically it was the best management practices from the Maine Beekeepers Association. There's a copy of that in your application that I kind of cut and paste from. And we're consistent with that as far as the number of colonies per square footage of your lot size. So we're in line with what we should be doing there. We could consider adding additional management standards as referenced in the State Beekeepers Association. That does talk about putting up, and I shouldn't paraphrase this necessarily, but putting up like a barrier so that the bees, when they fly, they're not necessarily coming into your property directly. And apparently there is actually some logic to that. My quick explanation or understanding of that is if you put up, your hive is here and you put up some type of barrier or fence like that, the bees then come down and fly into it versus like coming in at an angle, like if they were coming into a runway or something. So you're putting some type of obstruction in front of them, and that potentially could provide some additional protection or security, maybe relieve some concerns of a neighbor if we add some of those barriers in place. I'm not finding the exact language that's in here right now, but I know that that was referenced in the Beekeepers Association recommendations. That association does not reference setbacks from a residential uses, so I know that was discussed at the last meeting as well, as, hey, should we be increasing the distance? That was one of the questions we asked. That's not a recommendation by the beekeepers. They rather see these barriers put in place. And then, again, there may be questions for Wendell as far as, what has our experience been before with respect to the keeping of bees and how we dealt with those complaints in the past. So again, looking to see if there's any reason to change anything, or if we're looking to add some additional performance standards.
Just for clarification purposes, so the property owner whose hive was too close to the property line, and you're saying that it was moved?
Too close to the neighboring residence. So originally the hive was within 100
Right.
feet of the abutting property structure, their home. By moving that hive, my understanding is they were able to get it 100 feet away from that house then.
They are now in compliance.
That's my understanding.
Gotcha. Thank you. Councilor Jelinas?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, Director Hediger, the ordinance as written, you talk about it being consistent with best management practices, and I'm good with it as well. If we added that barrier thing, that would be incumbent on every beekeeper, or just if they had a neighbor potentially who was concerned, then then the fee of installing that would be on them? Or are we saying that if we added that into the ordinance, that that would be across the board, everyone would have to do it?
That's a good question. I guess we could look into that to consider that. I wouldn't think it would make sense necessarily if you're on a larger lot
Right.
in a rural Lewiston and you have several
Well, that's
acres.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I mean, on the one hand, yeah, so I didn't know if that was added, would that be just kind of messy?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it doesn't have to be messy, but yeah, it's an additional provision that beekeepers would need to be made aware of. We could potentially look at it, maybe limiting it to, and I don't know that this makes sense, but if we tied it to lot sizes potentially, I mean, that might not, from the beekeeper's perspective, it doesn't sound, my understanding is that probably doesn't make sense, right? That doesn't need to be a lot size requirement if you take certain provisions into consideration. But if that's something that we want to consider as a municipality, that if you only have a 10,000 square foot lot or something like that, and, and there's a concern, maybe they do have to put additional provisions in. I'd have to give that some more thought, as to whether or not, how burdensome is that gonna be? Is that necessary even? And again, it'll be somewhat like chickens in the sense that people don't need permits today to keep bees. So unless we get a complaint or it's made aware to us, and at that point, just like the similar situation now, hey, make sure it's 100 feet away. Oh, now you need a barrier as well. Those might be good alternatives versus saying you can't have any bees at all.
Right.
Councilor Pease?
Well, this barrier, is it gonna have to be on all 4 sides, 3 sides, 1 side? How's that gonna work?
My understanding is, and there's probably somebody watching at home that is swearing or correcting at me right now. I think it only has to be on the side that the opening to the hive is. So,
Just the opening side?
yeah. I'm looking at their recommendation. It was on page 3 of the best management practices there. It talks about hive placement. And it references that hives should not be placed directly against a neighboring property unless a solid fence or an impenetrable vegetative barrier not less than 6 feet high forms the property boundary. So in this case, hive entrances should face in such a direction that bees fly across your property, meaning the beekeeper's property. If this is impossible, then use barriers, hedges, shrubs, redirecting them in the flight pattern. So again, this is all about directing them into the hive away from other properties here. And to suggest this here, it says don't put it against a neighboring property. I mean, that obviously this is written for all of the state, so how you apply that in a more urban environment versus a rural area. I'm not sure they've taken that level of consideration into it.
We'll take further council comment, but it's my opinion that since this was brought about by a disagreement between 2 property owners, and that property owner is now in compliance, I see no reason to modify the ordinance at this point. Councilor Clement?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I like what staff has recommended in this case. I would strongly suggest that we eliminate the 100-foot limit between the hive and abutting structures. I think that's all we need to do in that regard. To Director Hediger's point, the state does require that you file with them and pay a $10 fee for a permit annually to keep bees. And the reasoning behind that is disease prevention. We've had some significant inroads to the number of bees over the last 2 or 3 years because of disease. And therefore the state, I don't know when they passed this, I brought up at a meeting this morning that Chapter 14 of our ordinances has got a pile of inconsistencies in it and things that have been repealed by the state and other laws have been passed. So we need to take a look at all that, but not necessarily tonight. But I think eliminate the 100-foot size and adopt the best practices of Maine beekeepers and we'd be golden. They have to get a permit from the state. We don't have to get involved in any licensing or anything like that, but education would be the key, I think, with the word out that we've done that, and let it go from there. Thank you.
Councilor McCarthy, do you have something?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm at a loss to the 100-foot setback from a person's property, from the building, because bees don't go in buildings. If they're gonna bother anybody, they're gonna bother you out in the backyard, so you could be right at your property line, 20 feet from a beehive. Whereas, yeah, I think that's sort of a random number that was thrown out there, and I don't see the need for the 100-foot setback. I think that direction of the hive obviously is an issue, or if you had some sort of a setback, if it's less than, if it's less than 20 feet from the property line, you have to put up a barrier or something to that effect. But I think that we need to eliminate that 100-foot from a structure, because I think that's sort of a silly thing, because, bees don't go into your house. They'll go, if they're going to attack you, which I've never been stung by a regular honeybee in my life, and I've lived here 65 years. So I don't think attack of the honeybees is anything that we need to worry about, and I would be all for eliminating that 100-foot setback or reducing it. I mean, you don't want a hive right on your property line, so perhaps something similar to what we do for the chickens, and a hive has to be a 20-foot setback from the property line, and then go from there. Thank you.
Councilor Pease.
I kind of agree with, thank you, Mr. Mayor, with Bob on the distance. I'm thinking is if there are two property owners and their building is closer to their property line than where the beehive is, and they cannot get 100 feet, then it's mandatory to put up a barrier.
I was, as you folks were talking, I was remembering that, again, the correspondence you folks received from the Good Food Council had a recommendation with bees as well. And they talk about reducing the setback distance from the property line by requiring a flyway barrier, so that's kind of what we're talking about, if the development is within 25 feet of the property line. Otherwise, no barrier is required. So maybe that's something that the council wants to consider as far as.
I think that makes more sense.
Any other feedback from us, Director Hediger?
So it sounds like what input was received is eliminate the 100-foot setback, and then make reference to the state's best management practices with respect to keeping the bees, and then look at the language that was provided to us by the Good Food Council with respect to the flyway barriers and the setbacks. Okay. Cool. I will draft something up and come back for a public hearing on that. Good.
Director Hediger, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
We'll keep you right there, and we're going to bring up our two shelter co-chairs, please.
Take care, Wendell.
If you could, the three of you, introduce yourselves, and then please proceed.
Good evening. My name is Craig Saddlemeyer. I live at 75 Maple Street in Lewiston, and I am co-chair of the Shelter Committee.
Amy Smith, I live at 122 Bartlett in Lewiston, co-chair of the committee.
And David Hediger, Director of Planning and Code Enforcement. David Hediger, Director of Planning and Code Enforcement.
And I'll just share briefly. I think David is going to basically walk us through the draft ordinance as the way to best use our time and structure the conversation. I shared the finalized version of the report and a memo to accompany it. Hopefully everyone got a chance to look at that. I just want to begin by saying, the committee really took council's input to heart with some of the revisions that we made to the report and recommendations in here. I will try to name some of those specifics as we go along and discuss some of the options. And I just want to generally, frame the conversation by keeping in mind that, what's being considered is substantial new regulations of shelters in the community. Really, with any of the options that we go with, it will be a substantial change. I think there's also, some good stuff in this ordinance and an opportunity to even potentially improve our analysis of the issue in the community and improve services to people who are homeless. And I think that there's a number of regulations being considered that individually, each one, there's a fair bit of logic behind them. When you look at the way, I guess what the committee is interested in, what I'll be representing as we discuss this, is the way that these regulations add up, because a number of them I think are trying to do the same thing, or similar, have overlapping purposes. And so I think the final piece to this is just getting some of the details right in a way that's sensible, provides the degree of oversight that the city is interested in, and still allows for effective service delivery in the community according to the needs. So I'll speak to that as we go along, but otherwise I'll hand it over to David to walk us through.
And I expect this to be somewhat of a tag team approach between the three of us as we get to certain sections here. And I'll quickly add that I've been on a number of ad hoc committees in my time with the city, and this was one of the probably better experiences as far as a group that actually where nearly everybody contributed and everybody actually had some input into the process, and provided an impressive report as well. So they should just, if anything comes out of this, they should be recommended for the effort and time that they put into this, because that hasn't always been the case with these types of committees.
Thank you for that, Director Hediger.
When we're going through this, as I noted in the memo, there's a couple things here that we're looking for. One is to provide guidance with respect to the draft ordinance, including direction on a number of proposals. And you'll see in there that I've kind of highlighted those sections. And then Craig has added where the recommendation of the committee is being sought with respect to a specific item. So the intent isn't necessarily to go through page by page unless you folks have questions, but I tried to pull out those areas that we felt that were worthy of bringing to your attention. We're also going to need, depending on how the evening goes here, some of these changes impact the zoning and land use code, which impacts the planning board. So there would need to be an action by the council to initiate an amendment so the planning board could consider those changes. Their changes are minor, but they relate directly to the shelter ordinance itself.
We're just trying to find out where you're starting, so.
So council, I believe he's starting, if you go to Mr. Hediger's memo, that is right after the final report. And then his ordinance is behind there, beginning on page 1, draft ordinance.
74.
Dave, is that where you're starting?
Yes.
Okay, that's
So I
what I
believe
thought.
it's my memo and then the next page after
You
that.
just had 74.
Yes, you had to go through the report and the
Okay.
attachments.
After 74. I just said that so I didn't look like the only one being lost.
So if we're good, page 1, the very bottom of this, under license requirement, we've added language in there that a license is not required for temporary accommodations using existing homes, apartments, hotels, or motels, or facilities in receipt of federal, state, or municipal subsidy when deemed in the local emergency. So that was discussed with you folks at one point. That was discussed with the shelter committee too. We have some type of local emergency. It's declared by the council. There's language in chapter 30 that says when that happens, there's a fire, there's a flood, something. We want to be able to use any of these facilities and not have to apply the shelter provisions. So that's what we're trying to do with that language there. Moving along on to page 2, under licensing authority, number 4, where it says note, staff is looking for guidance on which of these following to adopt. You're going to see that throughout this document here. So this section here references to how applications will be approved and renewed. And we've given 3 options here of whether or not a new license and renewals shall be reviewed by the council, new licenses shall be reviewed by the council, and then renewals are done by staff. or all new license and renewal applications shall be reviewed by the city clerk, the staff. So we have three options there. Option B is what the shelter committee is recommending. I guess I'd say to Craig and Amy, whenever we get to those, if you've got more to add, by all means, jump in.
I'll just point out, in the initial report, the recommendation was item C, which was staff review for initial and renewal. At the final meeting, before we issued the report, after further discussion, understanding that there was interest particularly in the creation, because there seems to be so much public interest in the creation of a new shelter, that that decision to license initially be made by council, but that following applications for renewal made sense to handle at the staff level.
I'm not sure what the pleasure of the mayor is, if you want us to go through all of these, or if you want to discuss the areas that we're looking for guidance as we hit them.
I think we should just discuss them as we get them, just to keep everything straight.
Great, so this is our first one we're looking for some guidance on.
Councilor McCarthy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am for A, that it's reviewed by the council both as an initial application and renewal. We do that on other things, liquor licenses, other actions, and considering the small number of shelters, it's not like it's going to be a big drain on resources for us to review a shelter license on an annual basis. So I think that that should still remain with the council as far as both the initial and renewal. Thank you.
Councilor Harriman?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My choice for this one was C, but I think B would be okay as well. I just feel like city staff is more than capable of handling these sorts of, it's like a business license. I think that city staff is perfectly able to do that. Thank you.
Councilor Scott?
Thank you. I'm comfortable with recommendation B by the committee. I feel that with city council approval on an initial new license and with the number of regulations and oversight in this ordinance, that I think that city staff would be able to handle any renewal process moving forward.
Councilor Jelinas?
Thank you. I also am comfortable with C actually, but I would go with B. I hear you, Councilor McCarthy, when you talk about the fact that we're doing this for other licenses, but I guess my feeling is just because we do it that way doesn't mean that we have to do it that way, moving forward. So I would endorse B.
Councilor Clement?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also would endorse item B. I think that any new venture, we need to take a look at in view of feedback that I've had from constituents and stuff like that. But once we establish something, I think we always have the option to overrule anything issued by the city. Am I not correct, City Administrator?
My understanding is any appeals would go before the Board of Appeals.
Okay. I'm comfortable with B. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I think we're okay with B, mostly.
I'm now on page 3, application submission requirements, number 2 and number 3. There was discussion about what type of background checks would need to be necessary. So great, we've added the language that an affidavit identifies all the owners, officers, members, managers, and partners, applicant, and their ownership, upon which the city clerk shall order a background check, and this shall be done annually. And then we've also asked for evidence of an adopted policy whereby the applicant shall provide, has provided background checks of all the persons as defined in Section B definitions. So basically, Section 2 would be background checks provided by the city. Section 3 would be at the time they submit an application that the applicant has a policy to provide background checks on their staff. One question that's since come up in talking with the city clerk's office and the police chief is we probably need to look at the language in number 2 a little bit more as far as what is a member, to provide some clarification on that, just as to avoiding that discussion when somebody actually comes in with an application, like who are the actual people that were doing the background check. I don't know who members are necessarily, owners is pretty clear to me. I think officers would be clear if it's an LLC, and managers. I'm not sure what members would be, so probably going to be talking to the police chief and the city clerk to see if there's some cleanup needs to happen there with respect to who those individuals actually are.
Councilor Pease?
My only problem with the background checks on this is you can have somebody that's a recovered addict that does a lot of work in these homes, and they may not pass a background check, so you're going to reject them, and they probably have the most experience out there because they've been out there.
I know this was discussed at the committee. Did you want to respond to that, Craig?
Yeah, that lived experience did come up. So I guess I'm not an expert in the section of city ordinance that has sort of the stand, like what's included in the background check. So I won't try to cite that from memory, but item 2 is background checks for, again, sort of the substantial decision makers for the organization. I think city ordinance, as it does with other licenses, defines, what's a strike against them for getting the license and what isn't. So it's not that everything is in there. I think there's certain windows of time, like recent windows of time that are considered, and certain offenses that are considered a problem that would disqualify them, and other offenses, either because of how long it's been or because they're not as severe, don't lead to the denial. And then item 3 is about evidence of adopted policy. So this is a layer, I don't think this is standard with every license, but this was a layer that was added, again, trying to get at what we thought council was interested in. So an adopted policy, here we're not saying precisely how they hire, how the decision makers hire their staff and what the qualifications are, but the city will review the policy and as a condition of issuing the license, be able to determine whether they think it's reasonable or not. So if a shelter felt that, certain staff were qualified under certain scenarios and allowing, certain histories for those staff, then that would be stated in their policy, and the city would have a chance to review it. So at this time, I don't think that the way this is written would restrict, would stop a shelter from making a reasonable allowance to address the concern that you have. That's my limited understanding. Sorry, go ahead.
Are you okay, Councilor Pease? Yeah, okay. Councilor Clement?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can see a reason for this. I mean, shelters would, by very operational definition, probably serve some vulnerable populations. And the types of people that you wouldn't want associated with these could be precluded by the proper background check. If you've got somebody who's a convicted pedophile, and you've got a shelter that's sheltering people, children, no. And I don't think that because somebody is an addict, a recovered addict, that should be a preclusion. But definitely there are certain types of people that should not be associated with vulnerable populations, and I can see a reason for that. Thank you.
Councilor Harriman?
Thank you. Yeah, I just had a question about what a background check would look for and why it would be required. I understand Councilor Clement's point regarding, someone who's been convicted of someone who's a pedophile who's maybe running a shelter with children. I could think of if someone is taking public funds and they've been convicted of some kind of financial crimes, maybe that makes sense. I don't really see many cases where, and maybe I just don't know the particular cases, but I don't know what the background check would be looking for and why it would be needed for this particular use, other than a few cases. So just wondering if there's more information that could be given on that.
Yeah, and I'll just say, as we have this conversation, let's make sure we differentiate between what number 2 and what number 3 is saying. And I would look to city staff to offer more detail on what a background check means by city ordinance.
So I was looking over my shoulder to see if the police chief was here, but I can offer you what the language is, and you'll see on page 4, we make reference to this section as to why we deny a license. It's related, but on page 4, under HD, this is the reasons for denial, suspension, or revocation of a license is in violation of any provisions pursuant to Chapter 22, Section 35B and C. What is that? That's the background check section. There's 2 sections there that are specifically referenced. One is if the applicant is a corporation, and if they have been convicted of any Class A, B, or C crime, a crime that's committed under the laws of the United States or any other state or territory which is punishable by a sentence at least as harsh as that authorized by the commission of the Class C crime. Police chief can tell me what that means, or maybe Mr. O'Malley can tell me what all that means. The other one is for an applicant. So that was for, first one was for a corporation. The second one is for an applicant. Again, an applicant has been convicted of any Class A, B, or C crime, or a crime committed under the laws of the United States or any other territory, provided that such conviction for an offense which is rationally related to the regulation of the business being sought to be licensed. I think the chief would say that's really the kicker there is rationally related. We've had this situation with tattoo artists and how they've had to, maybe they've had some convictions in the past and they've appealed for a license. It's been denied. It's gone to the board, and they had to make a determination as to whether or not the crime was rationally related to being a tattoo artist. So just try to think of some example of a crime being committed, and what does that have to do? How is it related? So I think that's what you're going to find with respect to the applicant. As far as the corporation, that reference is there as well, but I can't necessarily tell you what the difference between all these class crimes are and the duration associated with them.
Am I to understand, you're not really looking for guidance on that, on this section, or you're just
I was
updating
bringing it to your folks' attention because a number of councilors brought up the fact of looking for background checks. It was something that the committee was overall supportive with, so just wanted to flag that as you folks are essentially on the same page.
Yes.
With respect to this whole document, you folks are essentially on the same page. There's very few sections in here where I think there's a much difference between what the council's thoughts and concerns were and what the committee's were. And we're going to hit upon those as we go through this. So.
Unless there's further comments from the council, I think we should keep things moving.
Top of page 4, letter J, whether shelters serve as youth or family. So again, this is an application requirement. You're submitting that requirement to the clerks. We're going to ask them whether or not their shelter serves youth or families. Why are we doing that? Because we're going to potentially talk about setbacks for those types of shelters in proximity to parks, schools, and parks, schools, and whatever the other one was. Daycares. Thank you. So just keep that in mind. That's where that reference is coming from. Going back down page 4, under H2D, we just talked about that section. That's the connection to the section of ordinance that references background checks and what those past crimes are. Page 5. These are the the approval and operation requirements. So again, an applicant has to meet these in order to have a license and to maintain a license. So they're going to obtain a license by demonstrating they meet these criteria, or the city does an inspection at any time during their operation, and we find that they're lacking in these things. That's reason for possible suspension or denial. Well, I guess it wouldn't be denial at that point, but suspension of a license. So number 4, Maine State Housing Authority monitoring. This would be applicable only to homeless shelters participating in Maine Housing Monitoring Program. Number 5 is the coordinated entry system, participation in the state's coordinated entry system. I'm actually going to look to Craig to probably elaborate on these more, because I think he has a better understanding than I do on these. And then number 6 was the maximum number of beds in Lewiston, which we know that came up a number of times. If you haven't looked at the shelters report, you should look at page 35 of that. Craig has also summarized that in the memo. That was the shelter committee's executive memo, if you will. There's 3 options there with respect to how to come up with housing, the number of beds. I guess, Craig, maybe you could talk about these options and how we got there.
Yep. I'll just, so briefly, since Dave mentioned it, the coordinated entry, we spoke to that in our presentation, but that's basically about making sure that shelters that are operating are connected to the range of resources that exist across the state to help people become rehoused, return to the communities where they are from, where they'd prefer to return to, or the next best thing based on the services that are available there. So I expect the maximum beds one will be something we want to spend a little bit of time talking about. Since the last report showed you a couple of numbers that were trying to estimate the need for shelter beds in the community using numbers that we could, stand behind. We heard, I think we wanted to, dig into the numbers a little bit more, see if there are other ways to approach the estimate, and also dig in a little bit, because I think we were hearing from council that there was an interest in assessing the need of Lewiston residents that are homeless versus other folks for whom their last known residence was not Lewiston, and just being able to parse out those numbers a little bit better. So that's what the tables do on page 35 of the report and page 2 of the memo. And I'm happy to go into detail about it, but there's a lot there, and sometimes talking about math out loud for too long doesn't actually help. So the summary is that we're offering a range of need for the council's consideration using 2 different methods to get there. The first method is based upon rejection rate at local shelters, so looking at how many people are being turned away just for capacity alone. Again, keep in mind, we're not counting folks being denied for eligibility reasons or people that are deterred because of eligibility reasons, just folks who seek shelter in Lewiston and are denied because the shelter's at capacity. So we use that method to develop a range suggesting that the total beds needed in Lewiston to serve the homeless population is 191, and the total beds needed to serve the homeless Lewiston residents specifically is 134. So between 134 to 191 beds to serve homeless folks in Lewiston that's using the rejection rate method at local shelters. The second table, which is an expansion upon the numbers that we presented last time, again trying to get a little bit closer to the need of Lewiston residents specifically, and that presents the number you saw before, so 270 beds needed to serve Androscoggin County, and then 202 beds needed to serve Lewiston residents specifically. Then at the bottom, there's also some calls out to how many additional beds are needed to serve Androscoggin County, and recommendations that other communities like Auburn, like Leeds, that already provide some degree of shelter service, or other communities in Androscoggin that want to help address this need could develop additional beds as well. So those are 134, 191, 202, or 270. I think are all justifiable numbers that speak to the need in Lewiston. That would be, if you were going to place a limit on shelter beds, those are numbers you could stand behind in terms of what the limit would correspond to. With that being said, option 3, I mean, truly, the Shelter Committee is not recommending a cap based on the observation that, you know, we had a recommendation for a shelter over 10 years ago. Nothing happened in that time period. Basically, creating a homeless shelter it's not an easy thing to do. It seems unlikely that they're just going to, explode in their development from the Shelter Committee's perspective. So that's why no cap is recommended, because we think it's kind of self-regulating in terms of how hard it is to do to begin with. With that being said, we've provided these 4 numbers as a menu of options, anticipating that, one, to identify the need, and secondly, anticipating that council may be interested in establishing this limit. With that said, option 3, which is really, I think, what or some version of option 3, if a limit was going to be imposed, is what the Shelter Committee would prefer to no cap, would be using the math equation. In this case, this is the math equation that gets you to the 202 beds. But basically, using a math equation that's adjusting to the numbers on an annual basis. The equation that's in front of you is one that could actually go up or down. So you set the limit this year. Maybe there's everyone's housing needs get met, and we find that less shelter beds are needed. So each year the number would adjust. And when someone applies for a permit to create a new shelter, you look at what that year's shelter bed need is, and so the limit is set based on that. And if the limit is below the number of shelter beds that we have, then that application would not get approved, because we wouldn't need those extra beds. So that is, I think, the summary of how we got there. I'm happy and ready to speak in as much or as little detail as you want on the math. And yeah, there you have it.
Councilor Jelinas?
Okay, thank you for that. 2 quick things. So I just want to be clear. So the coordinated entry system in the section before the numbers here, that would pertain to like current shelters right now.
So
when you talk about substantial changes earlier on tonight, I mean, that's what I'm thinking about when I look at something like this and I look at what we have, what we don't have.
It's a substantial change. Later in the ordinance, we do offer a 5-year grace period.
Right.
So it would not be required immediately. The state is going to, the coordinated entry system that the state is launching for adult shelters will be available to shelters that don't otherwise participate in state programs. So basically we encourage all shelters to get involved with it sooner rather than later, voluntarily for the benefit of the folks that they serve. But eventually they would be required to do this, yeah. And that is a substantial change.
Thank you. Just one more quick thing. I appreciate the mathematics offered under option 3, but I personally would go with option 2. I understand that just when I think about like the development of shelters and the work that goes behind that, I honestly think option 3 would be unnecessary. I don't think we're going to get to that point. But I know there was a lot of work in getting to that, but I would get behind option 2.
Councilor Scott?
Thank you. I would have to agree completely. I don't see any need for a cap or that put in an ordinance at all. The proposal that we got at the beginning of the year, I think, was for 20 beds, something to that effect. We know what our shelters have now. I think it would be highly doubtful that we're going to have a developer come in and want to put a 400-bed unit somewhere. I think we'll be lucky if we get a couple of people that are going to be able to put together an option for 20 to 30. And I'm hoping we get that sooner rather than later. So I am not in favor of any cap whatsoever.
Councilor Harriman?
Thank you. I would also be in agreement. I think the Shelter Committee's recommendation for no cap is perfectly reasonable. If if there ever becomes a problem, we could revisit that in the future, but I don't foresee there being an issue with the number of shelter beds. So I think no cap is fine. Thank you.
Councilor LaChapelle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Out of all due respect to my fellow councilors, I would disagree wholeheartedly. I think a cap on beds is necessary. I do not want to see Lewiston become the homeless shelter of the state of Maine. If we have the facilities, we had an application for 20 beds. If we added 30 more, or give a cap of 30, that brings it to like 110 or 106, 90, 30 more, that's 120 beds total cap. We have 88 beds, so let's say it's 90. If you had 30 more, it'd be a cap of 120 beds. So I feel comfortable with 120 beds for the city of Lewiston. We have surrounding towns that can start developing that also, Auburn, Sabattis, wherever. I think we're stepping up, and I would be in favor of 120 cap bed count. And with no cap on how many beds can be in one unit. If they want to have, if somebody closes and they want to open up a 40-bed shelter, I'm fine with that. But 120 beds would be my cap.
Councilor Pease.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I kind of agree with Councilman LaChapelle. I think that's a good cap, and they can always come back and go ask for more. If we find that we really need that many more, that we give them this and they fill right out. I think they can come back with some information showing that, yeah, we really needed more. Let's give it to them. But I think we need to start with something. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm looking, one of the places that wasn't highlighted talks about hours of operation. Now, is that going to be retroactive to the shelters that are in operation now at any point in time? It says 24/7? Because you just talked about phasing in some of the rules to affect the shelters that are now in operation. Would they have to be a 24/7 shelter moving forward?
Yes, they would. Not to jump ahead, but if people are concerned about that, on page 7, J, is the exemptions.
Excuse me, Director. Sorry, Councilor Director. If we can just focus on the question now. We're
Well,
talking about
that's part
shelter.
of the ordinance, and that's part of the section we're dealing with, and I think it's important to know whether the shelters, before we put an ordinance forward, we need to know if the other shelters are going to be affected. Because the shelters have been in service to the homeless community for quite a while, and I'd hate to see them shut down because they can't afford to go 24/7.
Yep. So, good point. And to be clear, we're not looking to overlook any of those other sections there. We were highlighting the ones based upon comments from past meetings. But to your question about hours of operation, no, that would not be an exemption. On page 7, we've listed the exemptions that would apply. And existing shelters would be exempt from transportation provisions, proximities to schools, parks, and daycares, proximity to other homeless shelters, accessibility, and beds. Beds being the, what criteria is that? Beds, no more than 2 unrelated individuals allowed in 1 bedroom. The next section of that, and I do realize we're jumping around, but maybe to the council's concerns, with the exception of section 12, all other shelters would have to meet these provisions by January 1st of 2028. So the the committee talked about whether or not all establishments, existing shelters should be grandfathered, or whether or not they should in time be brought into compliance. And the committee landed on 5 years to try to bring those into compliance. It was brought up at those committee meetings as well that we absolutely need to make sure those shelters are aware of this proposal going forward. So when we move forward with a public hearing, we really should be reaching out to those 4 establishments just to let them know, hey, council's considering changes here, you will be impacted one way or another here. You should be made aware and, participate if necessary.
I would just add that, yeah, that this item had the widest range of debate, I think, within the committee. But so to answer your question directly, the hours of operation would be required for existing shelters within, with respect to the grace period. So they'd have 5 years to reach that compliance.
Well, I don't agree with that, and I'm hoping we can revisit that.
If we can get back to the shelter bed discussion, just on this current item, and then we'll move to other items. Councilor Harriman?
Thank you. Yeah, regarding the number of beds, would just remind everyone that Lewiston is not only the largest city in the county, it's the service center for the county, for the surrounding area. If you're out in Minot, you don't go to the hospital in Minot, you go to the hospital in Lewiston. If you live out in other rural towns, they don't have a technical high school, they come to Lewiston if students want to go to a technical high school, or to go to college, Lewiston or Auburn. Same thing with our many state offices. If you need to go to the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, that's in Lewiston. HHS is in Lewiston. So if we're expecting all these people to come to Lewiston to do their business, we should take the responsibility as the service center to to provide for the needs of everyone who we expect to come here to do their business. Thank you.
Councilor Clement?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Talking about capacity and beds and numbering, I think something to keep in mind here is I would expect that the fire department or the fire marshal is going to set an occupancy limit on any particular structure or building, and we'd have to abide by that. We could say you can have 100 beds. Fire marshal might say you can have 43, and he's going to be the authority having jurisdiction. So I think that's kind of a moot point for us to argue capacity in beds, because it's not up to us to determine what the occupancy is. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Once again, I think that that's going to be a situation where life safety and other codes come into play.
If I can.
Director Hediger, would you like to respond to that?
In case there is confusion, we haven't necessarily talked about number 7, even though Councilor LaChapelle mentioned it, but number 6 references the number of beds in town and the different suggestions made by the committee. Number 7 is the maximum number of beds in a specific homeless shelter. To Councilor Clement's point, a shelter is going to be designed for whatever it is, and building codes, fire codes are going to say you can have so many people in there. The point was, because we heard from the council last time, is there concern about the size of an individual shelter as well? What's the magic number for that? So whatever, and we kind of just came up with 40, in part because I think what our largest shelter now is 32. There's nothing magic about 40. I mean, that number could be anything, it could be nothing. But that was a concern that we heard from the council as far as what an individual shelter. So there's 2 numbers being considered: the number of shelters in the community, the number of number of beds in the community, and the number of beds at an individual facility. So just want to make that distinction known.
If I may, sorry, I'll wait to speak. So I would just say, to point back to the the methods we're using to estimate need in the community. I do think that the 134, and we're talking about a difference of just 14 beds, I guess, between that and 120. I believe that is a very conservative number. Again, this is based upon folks that over a recent 12-month period were denied due to the unavailability of beds. The 191 is speaking to if you're looking at all of the folks that were denied. The 134 is trying to adjust based upon the the survey data that we have to folks with last known address in Lewiston. So there's even with the 134 we're talking about not meeting the full need of people that are gonna be knocking on the door. It's just, trying to approximate how many folks from Lewiston are the ones seeking that service. So I think it's already a very conservative number.
Councilor LaChapelle?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And not to get into a tit for tat or play tennis with you on that, in my speaking with particularly Hope Haven, they did not refuse anybody over the last 8 months because of capacity. So they had capacity. And I understand what you're saying, some places, and I talked to a couple other places, that they've been full all along. So just because they refused, there was still some available in the city. So just to clarify for my esteemed counselor from Ward 6, we're talking about a bed capacity total max for the city, not for a building, for a city bed. So that's what I was suggesting, for a total of 120 beds total for the city, not for one particular building. Just a cap on it, just to explain. Thank you.
Councilor McCarthy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would be comfortable with the cap of 134. I think that's a little over 50% increase in what our bed capacity is now. I think, see how things play out, see how it affects everybody. If we have the demand and we get up and there's a request over we've hit the 134 and there's requests above, or if someone comes in and they want to build a 20-bed shelter and there's only 10 beds available under the cap, then we could look at changing it. But I think at this point in time that we need a cap, and I think that 134 is a conservative number. I'm a conservative, and I would be comfortable going with the 134. Thank you.
Councilor Harriman?
Thank you. Just to remind folks that that number is based on people who have actually gone to a shelter and been refused due to capacity. There are people who are refused due to other reasons, and our current shelters do not serve those populations. There are also people who, who know about those restrictions, know that they won't be accepted at any of our shelters, and won't bother go anyway, because why would they? It's just a waste of time if you know that they're going to take one look at you and say no. So just a reminder that I agree with Craig that these numbers are very conservative. It's only looking at one certain demographic or one certain number of folks who have actually gone to a shelter and been denied just because of capacity. So just that reminder. Thank you.
Councilor Clement?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just briefly to Councilor LaChapelle and Councilor McCarthy. I'm ambivalent as to a number, 120 or 134, but I can't see going above 134 initially. This is a new venture for the city, and I think we have to enter this slowly. We don't jump in not knowing the depth of the water. Thank you.
For the sake of moving things along, we're talking 14 beds, go 134.
Director Hediger, I think 134 is where we're at.
Thank you. Do we need to talk more about the number of beds in an individual shelter?
I don't
believe so.
That's a no, Director
So
Hediger.
section will disappear then. I will delete that section in its entirety.
Councilor LaChapelle,
Mr.
did you
Mayor.
have something?
Yes, and I want to thank Counselor from Ward 2. I definitely want to come back to the hours of operation, and that's in that section. And I'm not in favor of forcing our existing shelters to become a 24-hour shelter. I'm not in favor of forcing our existing shelters that close during the day to have them make sure they stay open all day long. So I would be in favor of grandfathering all existing shelters in as far as hours of operations. And I think they should be held to the same standard for security, safety, that type of thing, but not to infringe on the current shelters' hours of operation.
Yeah, Director Hediger, that's on page 7, and we're still on page 6, correct? Or
Page 5 and page 7.
page 5? All right.
If I may add something here.
Oh, I see. Oh,
I think that there's two options that the council could consider, and one is an exemption built into the ordinance itself. It's also the case that, when applying for the license or the license renewal, the applicant could, make the case that they're an existing, could basically request an exemption through the application process, I believe.
Yeah.
I don't know if you wanna say more about what that means.
I'm not sure what that's gonna look like necessarily, but I mean, if the concern is of the council that you don't want that to apply at all, I mean, then we could add that to the list of exemptions under section J on page 7. Again, that's, and it could be as simple as that. It's just a matter of whether or not the council feels that there's a need for these facilities to be, over time, be open for more hours of the day. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, Craig and Amy, but the concern, I believe, of the shelter committee was that a number of our current shelters, they close now, and where do they go? They have nowhere to go. They go to the library, they go to the park, they're on the street type situation. That's not a situation that I think anybody wants to see, so how do you provide another option for them? And the intent with a new operation is that they may close off all the bedrooms in that shelter, but there's a rec room, there's a lounge, there's a space in that facility where people can congregate during the day to keep warm, to get counseling services, whatever the case may be. My understanding, I think our understanding is that's not a service that's necessarily provided now. Do we want to make sure that the existing shelters in the community within 5 years start doing that?
Yes.
It's up for the council to decide.
Can we put a pin in that, add that to the exemptions discussion? And then we can continue in order.
So let's see. We are now on page 6, number 9. Proximity to schools, parks, and daycares. Again, we have 3 options here. This was based again upon comments that we heard from the council. We took that, the committee took that one step further with the reference to facilities that serve youth and families. I think a couple councilors made a point of maybe there should be a different standard for those types of establishments. So option 1, shelters that don't serve youth or families shall not be located with 500 feet of a pre-existing school, park, or daycare. Option 2, shelters which do not serve youth or families shall not be located within 500 feet of a pre-existing school or daycare. So the only difference between that is park. So option 1 and 2 are the same, except we've taken park out of that. That's the shelter committee's preference. And then option 3, shelters in general, no differentiation as to who your population is that's being served, will not be located within 500 feet of a pre-existing school, park, or daycare.
Yeah, so, I think for this, piece, item 9, as we discuss this, I think it's important to try to identify what, we are trying to achieve with the regulation itself. So, with item 9, my impression is, there's concern about, conflict with the public or certain sites that provide services to vulnerable populations. Item 10, that I'll bring up now because I think it's related, is concerned about the issue of concentration in terms of like how many shelters exist within that are close together. And then later we'll consider the question of the zones where shelters are allowed. So I think these 3 items are important to discuss together because they just have a very strong interacting effect. So, on item 9, I guess first of all, I'll say that the park one, the shelter committee felt the schools and daycares, I think, are understandable. The park, there was strong objection to, given that, I mean, primarily, well, anyone can congregate in a park, no matter where they sleep at night. The primary reason people congregate in the park is because they don't have anywhere to go. We're trying to address the issue of where they have to go with the 24/7 piece, respecting that council may grant the exemption for existing shelters. We still think, that it's best practice, and it helps address the issue of some people, whether it's just them spending idle time, or maybe, they need privacy, to stay in their room and recover mentally. And when they're arbitrarily pushed out into public, then that creates opportunities for public conflict. So the 24/7 piece is trying to get at that. We've also recommended, and I think has been embraced, the good neighbor policy, so shelters actually communicating to their guests. There's a certain level of behavior that's expected in the shelter, but also within a given radius outside the shelter. So there's a number of things that we're trying to include here to reduce the opportunity for conflict between someone who is a guest at a homeless shelter and the general public. So the park piece, I think, is really, people will go to a park if they have nowhere else to go, really no matter how far the shelter is from a park. So for those reasons, the shelter committee preferred option 2. So shelters which do not serve youth or families, so basically adult-specific shelters not being located with 500 feet of a pre-existing school or daycare, based upon the logic of what this is trying to do, seemed reasonable. Though I should say the shelter committee did not actually recommend any proximity limits. I'll just say a couple more things and then invite reaction and discussion. But so with that in mind, on item 10, the shelter committee did not recommend a buffer between shelters. The cap that's been discussed is already, there's not really many more shelters that are going to get developed as a result of the cap to begin with. So I think that's already a pretty significant regulation that's going to prevent the proliferation or concentration of additional shelters. The buffer on its own, I think, makes some sense from a deconcentration standpoint, but the zoning is already constricted where shelters can be built so much that when you add these buffers, you almost can't do them anywhere, and you might actually be buffering out sites that, when you actually look at them, make some sense. But because of this buffer number, that site gets excluded from the considerations. So on the buffering between shelters, the committee has recommended no buffers, and the committee has recommended expanding the zones. Again, the zones to areas that are, already highly impacted by the presence of the homeless community, and would, benefit, I think, most immediately from these types of solutions. But if you combine the buffers, if you combine the extremes of these options in terms of the buffers and not expanding the zone, then you're making it nearly impossible, or certainly very impractical, to choose a good location. So I offer that as you discuss this.
Councilor LaChapelle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As far as number 9, there are existing laws right now on our books that where certain people, we alluded to earlier, pedophiles cannot be within, I think it's 1,000 feet of a park stay. You mentioned a lot of the homeless people are coming out of jails and they have no place to stay, and they allude to sleeping arrangements. There are certain buildings that they cannot stay within the city of Lewiston around parks. So I would follow the existing laws that are on our books. We do not know, because we're not doing background checks on any of the guests that are coming, and nor should we. I'm not asking for that. But I am definitely in favor of option 3, the 500 feet from pre-existing schools, parks, or daycares. You're absolutely right, they can walk to the park, and nothing prevents them, but the facility should not be any closer to that. As far as 10, I'm agree with you, option 2, there should be no buffer between shelters. If it's gonna be availability of buildings, facilities, and if one opens up near another one, so be it. I would be in favor of the third option on 9 and the second option on 10.
Councilor Harriman.
Thank you. I would follow the Shelter Committee's recommendation on both of these option 2 on number 10, no buffer between shelters, and then no proximity buffers around schools, parks, and daycares. I mean, a shelter is where people, it's where people live or sleep, and I don't believe we have any similar restrictions on things like apartment buildings or rooming houses. We can't have an apartment building within 500 feet of a school.
You can't have certain people living in those apartment buildings.
Correct,
It's
but
the
we're-
tenants that are living there. So our concern is who is staying in the shelter. They should be afforded the same protection. The public should be afforded the same protection as in any other buildings that are around there.
Okay, well, that's an individual case-by-case basis. That's, we don't know who is staying at a particular shelter, so we can't assume that they're all pedophiles or all criminals. So I don't believe we have any restriction on whether you can have an apartment building or a rooming house within a certain distance of a school or a park or a daycare. So I just don't see any reason to have similar restrictions on a shelter, especially with a park is just for everybody to use. So I would just go with no buffer between shelters and no proximity limits to these 3 uses. Thank you.
Councilor Scott.
Thank you. So I'm going to have to agree with that. I am in favor of option 2. I don't believe that we should be doing the parks. We have the vast majority of our homeless population living in the parks right now. I think that by doing 500 existing from option 3, I feel like we're automatically assuming that the folks that are using our facilities are people that we don't want in our parks or pretty much in our city. And so I'm very leery about doing something to that effect. On number 10, I would agree with option number 2, that I think that with a cap, I would agree that there's probably no need for a buffer between shelters. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I'm just, wasn't quite clear. What was your preference, Counselor, for number 9?
2.
2, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, real quick, if I could get Counselor Harriman, he said he agreed on number 9 with the shelter recommendation. Was he talking the bold bullet or option 2?
The bold bullet, the shelter.
That's what I thought. Thank
Shelter
you.
recommendation of no proximity
Thank you.
limits. Thanks.
So this workshop should be ending now, but we're not quite finished. Administrator Hunter, what are our options at this point?
Well, I guess for the counselors that haven't weighed in, if they could at least weigh in on the option, so we could put something in the ordinance, and then it would allow for further discussion when you actually have it presented at the ordinance.
Okay.
And the only other component would be the zoning changes. And that's, again, something that we can take just a quick straw poll on between the 2 bullets, and then that way we have something in the ordinance that is able to be discussed one way or the other when it comes to the public hearing.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Clement.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Option 2 on both from this chair. And I would think we've only got 2 or 3 other items. Why don't we wipe this clean tonight, and then we can move on to the next phase? It shouldn't take us more than 5 minutes, I wouldn't think.
Councillor, so am I understanding that we're taking option 2 for both 9 and 10?
So
That's
I,
fine. I vote yes.
Mr. Mayor, I have 4 now for option 2 under 10, so we're all set with that.
Okay.
And then I need at least, right now it's kind of split, so I have 2 votes for option 2, 1 vote for option 3, and 1 vote for the bold. So if I could get the other, option
How are
2.
we feeling? Option 2.
Yes.
And again, we're not voting, we're doing thumbs.
Yes.
Right, yeah. We're not calling a roll here. Okay, option 2.
Counselor Jelinas?
I just have concern about, barreling through this. I have some very strong opinions about, looking at current shelters, the whole 24/7 thing that I think we're gonna have some discussion about. And I don't know that I wanna go through that discussion hastily. So I don't know, are you asking that those comments be made when it comes during the next council meeting?
You have 2 readings for this.
Okay.
So it allows for plenty of discussion. It just gives us the opportunity to post the legal ad.
Okay. That's fine, I'll talk about it then.
Councillor LaChapelle, you had a
Just a
question?
question in regards to, so at that point, we can add or delete something from this without having to
Depending on
resubmit it?
depending on the level of substantiation of changes. That, if you all of a sudden radically changed, then.
Well, we
then-
haven't even addressed no barrier or low barrier shelters, and I haven't seen that in
Exactly,
here.
so,
That's something that I want to discuss also, and I know.
so then I would
Counselor.
recommend, we have time. We talked about having another meeting next Tuesday. Is that something that works with everybody's schedule still?
So be it. Just lost Stephanie.
Did we, okay.
I think this is a very important topic, and
I agree.
if we need to do that, I think we build it in, and because I do not want to rush it, and we promised that we would move forward and have something ready, so I just as soon meet next Tuesday
Okay.
and move forward.
Turn into, what is
Yes,
the
this
date
would be a
from?
workshop.
Right, yeah, a
only.
continuation of this workshop.
Correct. Is
Yes.
there anybody that can't do it?
It's the 23rd.
3rd.
At what time?
And we would start at the regular 6 o'clock time.
Would that work out for you all?
Director Hediger, I assume you'll be available?
I will be available.
Oh, look at that.
I had already pulled.
Our shelter co-chairs, would you be available?
Okay, so we'll continue this workshop till then.
I guess, yeah, at this point, we'll put this discussion on pause and pick it right back up where we left off next Tuesday. We will take a few minutes and then we will start the council meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, welcome to Lewiston City Council. We will begin with the pledge, and Kevin, will you please lead us? I was down at the Smart Pain Park this morning, and I want to give a shout out to Public Works. They're busy putting up things for the festival. Balloon Festival is this weekend. I encourage all of you to go down. Hopefully we're going to have great weather. Madam Clerk.
All roll call votes for this meeting will begin with the Councilor of Ward 1.
And Madam Clerk, you sent us the minutes?
We did, but it was late today, so if you want to bump it, you're welcome to that, or if you're ready to vote, that's fine too, whatever you're
If we can
comfortable with.
bump it, that would be great.
No problem. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. We're now time for public comment. Any member of the public may make comments regarding issues pertaining to Lewiston City Government. This period is reserved for non-agenda items. Public comment is also allowed during individual agenda items. Public comment is limited to 3 minutes per person. Please state your name for the record, and please indicate if you're a Lewiston resident. Because this is the business meeting of the City Council, all questions should be directed to the mayor, who will ask staff to follow up at a future time. It is illegal for the City Council to allow comments related to personnel matters. All personnel complaints should be made directly to City Administration.
Ron Potvin, 291 Pond Road. I'm the Vice President of the Store Next Door, the organization which services Lewiston's homeless school population. I'm here after listening to your workshop regarding the report from the Ad Hoc Committee. And I have some real red flags that came out on that. In the discussion where you wanted to talk about the maximum number of beds you want to allow. You know, just in the report itself, the numbers that were presented, we deal with 250 some odd homeless students in our school system. 250. Those children have parents. Those children have siblings. You're recommending a little bit more than 100 beds. Are the kids not people? Do they not need sheltering? This has to be really at the forefront. The kids are enormously important, and they're struggling and going through an awful lot. If we start at the beginning, we do it right. What I hear from a lot of my neighbors is, if we're doing this, let's do it right the first time. Let's be realistic on the needs that are out there. And if you're going to address needs, start at the kids, 256. Take into account their parents. These are people in tents. These are people living in cars. These are people living in the parks. There's a real need out there. And the number, it floors me, really, honestly. I can show any of you the servicing we're doing for these 250 kids. And if they need sheltering, well, so does their family. So I think, I'm hopeful that you all can take into account a difference between adult sheltering and family sheltering and youth sheltering, because those are all very significantly different types of sheltering that all has to be addressed. And where you have this before you, now is a great time to take it all into account and do it right the first time. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lisa Rodriguez, 28th Street in Auburn. I am the Share Center Director. I am here representing not just Share Center, but our thousands of educators, children, caretakers, municipalities across the state of Maine. I'm here because we're at a precipice. We've been asked to leave the Martell School, where we we rescue reusable resources, and in doing so, we support Maine's environment, education, and economy. We are such a critical part of this community. We've grown so much having that Martell space, and I've been pounding the pavement for 3 years trying to find another space, and it's been extremely difficult. We were under the assumption, the original plan was that Avesta Property Management was to tear down the building and start construction, and we would be using that time to stay there, and then they were going to help us to move to another property. They are no longer, we've been told they're no longer going to be doing that, and the building is going to be abandoned and empty for the winter. What we're asking is that that the city council would consider letting us stay. We are willing to pay for electricity, any repairs that are needed in the interim while we're still looking to find another place. We will be a designated 501c3 next month. That's going to open up opportunities for grants and funders that are, we need that status to take in money from funders and other grant opportunities so that we can move on to a more permanent place. We have helped even Lewiston municipalities. So many people come to us. We had a request from the city of Lewiston when for our cooling shelter. Where did they come? They came to Share Center to get cooling rags and water bottles. We're just asking for you to please consider letting us stay as we continue to get more funds and move into something else. We've been a caretaker there for 3 years. There's only been one incidence of vandalism. If we're allowed to stay there and continue to be a caretaker, if the building is empty, I know there will be continuous vandalism. So again, I'm asking that you please consider helping to save Share Center. We literally rescue and repurpose millions of dollars of materials every year, including beds and dressers that help the homeless shelters, New Beginnings, Safe Voices, all of the public schools. So please, I ask you to please consider rescinding our eviction notice. Thank you.
Good evening, Peter Geiger, 16 Brentwood Avenue, and I also work in Lewiston. I want to piggyback on the Share Center, and particularly from the business perspective. Back in 1987-88, when I first adopted Montello School, and there was 944 students and 150 staff, we realized that the water bottles and the backpacks and the pens and the pencils and all the things that we would throw away had value to that particular school. When the Share Center started, we started to send all of our goods over to them. And I think about the value that they bring. First of all, as a business who is able to donate product and give it a new life, it's critically important that this continue. But you have colleges like Bates Bowdoin that make significant donations to the Share Center, and while I'm not on their board, I have been trying to work with Lisa to just find some place to go. But as a business, I recognize what the value is, not just to Lewiston, but to all of the communities, all of the schools, all of the nonprofits. It would be a colossal mistake for this organization to belly up and go away at a time when we're trying to repurpose things, when we're trying to help the environment. And so I joined Lisa in trying to find a way to at least extend her stay where she is until such a time as there's another space available. But as a business and as a taxpayer and as a citizen of Lewiston, there's nothing better than the Share Center and what they offer. If you think about it, if they go away, then every nonprofit is now going to buy whatever they need to buy at inflated prices, and it's not going to be pretty for anybody. So, as an employer, I am thrilled to be able to have a place to send materials, and I think I speak for probably every other business that does that. And so, I really hope that there's some way in which Share Center can continue where they are until such a time as they can move. And I think Lisa has worked really extraordinarily hard to make anything and everything happen. So anyway, that's my 2 cents on that initiative.
Good evening. My name's Jonathan Carsley, 5 St. Joseph Avenue here in Lewiston. I'm a 20-year veteran music teacher who has taught in Lisbon School Department and Buckfield School Department for many years. And over the course of my career, I've relied heavily on the Lewiston Auburn Share Center to supplement my department's budget. We have been able to get tens of thousands of dollars worth of furniture, instructional and office supplies.
Sir, excuse me, if you could just lower your voice just a smidge, that'd be great.
Sure, it's causing distortion.
No worries.
I'm sorry. I should step away from the mic. Tens of thousands of dollars worth of furniture and instructional office supplies, music library, organization and storage materials, and supplies for a sewing and cooking club that I run after school at Buckfield Junior Senior High School. These items would otherwise be discarded and sent to a landfill, forever lost to our classrooms, our programs, and most importantly, our students. I feel so strongly about the incredible impact that this organization has on our community that I became a regular volunteer at the Share Center this year. It is in that role that I saw firsthand the excitement that our members get shopping in our center, the appreciation and gratitude that our members show each week are a testament to the importance of the work that we are doing. Many people in our organizations know of us and often associate us with work that we do for the schools, but the Share Center services not only educators across the state, but other nonprofit organizations at work in our community. This organization must find a new facility. Many people depend on being able to access these essential services and supplies. During these times, many of my colleagues across the nation are leaving education. Programs such as the Share Center give teachers and other nonprofit support that they need to overcome the obstacles that they face every day. We are asking the committee for the gift of time for our organization to find a suitable home, a building or storefront that better meets our needs as an organization. Surely there's a philanthropy group or philanthropists in this area that can help us bring this vision to reality. On behalf of my fellow educators, I thank you for the opportunity to address this committee this evening and for the work that you do for this community.
Further public comment? Madam Clerk, the consent agenda.
Sure, there are 4 items on the consent agenda this evening. Item number 1, amendments to the traffic schedule to add stop signs at Mason Avenue and Sargent Avenue at the intersections with Morse Avenue. Number 2, authorization for the city clerk to cast the city's ballot for the Maine Municipal Association's Executive Committee and Vice President. Number 3, order authorizing execution of municipal quitclaim deeds for real estate located at 36 Shawmut Street, 95 Horton Street, and 5 Grove Mount Lane. And number 4, amendment to the personnel policy to update the equal employment opportunity section of the policy due to changes in Maine state law.
May I have a motion?
So moved.
Councilor Jelinas, second by Councilor Clement. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Sure, Counselor from Ward 1?
Yes.
Ward 2?
Yes.
Ward 3? Yes. Ward 4?
Yes.
Ward 5?
Yes.
Ward 6?
Yes.
Ward 7?
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7-0.
Item number 5.
Item number 5, public hearing for approval of an outdoor entertainment permit for a musical concert in Pettingill Park. Requested action to conduct a public hearing on an application for an outdoor entertainment event in Pettingill Park and to grant a permit for an outdoor entertainment event as required by the City Code of Ordinances, Chapter 10, Article 1, Section 10-3, for an outdoor music concert to be held at Pettingill Park on Tuesday, October 20th, contingent upon positive recommendations from the Police Department, Fire Department, Code, Health Officer, and Land Use Inspector regarding compliance with all regulations and compliance with all city ordinances.
May I have a motion? Councilor Pease? Second by Councilor LaChapelle. Discussion? Councilor McCarthy?
It's August 30th, correct? Not August 20th?
Oh,
The bottom section says the 20th.
it says, right, but we're just looking at the application. I guess it's hard to read if it's the 20th or the 30th. The 30th? Okay, thank you. It's the 30th. Thank you, Counselor. We'll make that clarification.
Further discussion? Public comment on this agenda item? Back to the council. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Counselor from Ward 1?
Yes.
Ward 2?
Yes.
Ward 3?
Yes.
Ward 4?
Yes.
Ward 5?
Yes.
Ward 6?
Yes.
Ward 7?
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7-0.
Item number 6.
Item number 6, public hearing for approval of an outdoor entertainment permit for a musical concert in Kennedy Park. Requested action to conduct a public hearing on an application for an outdoor entertainment event in Kennedy Park and to grant a permit for an outdoor entertainment event as required by the City Code of Ordinances, Chapter 10, Article 1, Section 10-3, for an outdoor music concert to be held at Kennedy Park on Saturday, September 3rd, contingent upon positive recommendations from the Police Department, Fire Department, Code Health Officer, and Land Use Inspector regarding compliance with all regulations and compliance with all city ordinances.
May I have a motion? Councilor Pease, seconded by Councilor LaChapelle. Discussion. Public comment? Back to the council. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Counselor from Ward 1?
Yes.
Ward 2?
Yes.
Ward 3?
Yes.
Ward 4?
Yes.
Ward 5?
Yes.
Ward 6?
Yes.
Ward 7?
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7-0.
Agenda item number 7.
Item number 7, public hearing for approval of an outdoor entertainment permit for a musical concert for the back-to-school event in Kennedy Park. Requested action to conduct a public hearing on an application for an outdoor entertainment event in Kennedy Park and to grant a permit for an outdoor entertainment event as required by the City Code of Ordinances, Chapter 10, Article 1, Section 10-3, to AK Health and Social Services for an outdoor music concert to be held at Kennedy Park on Wednesday, August 24th, contingent upon positive recommendations from the Police Department, Fire Department, Code Health Officer, and Land Use Inspector regarding compliance with all regulations and compliance with all city ordinances.
I have a motion. Councilor Harriman, followed by Councilor Pease. Discussion. Councilor Jelinek.
I just want to comment that it's just really good to see these events, you know, coming up and the use of the park and the diversity of the events. I mean, I just am really pleased to be seeing this coming forward.
A second by Councilor Pease. Public comment for this agenda item? Back to the council. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Counsel from Ward 1?
Yes.
Ward 2?
Yes.
Ward 3?
Yes.
Ward 4?
Yes.
Ward 5?
Yes.
Ward 6?
Yes.
Ward 7?
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7-0.
Agenda item number 8.
Item number 8, public hearing and adoption of resolve to approve the Auburn Lewiston Home Consortium Home ARP Payment Year 21 Allocation Plan. There are 2 items for requested action. The first item is to conduct a public hearing regarding the proposed Auburn Lewiston Home Consortium Home ARP Payment Year 21 Allocation Plan.
May I have a motion?
Second.
Councilor Harriman, followed by Councilor Jelinek. Director Jeffers, would you like to start us off?
Start you off, give you a quick background on this. Back last year, as part of the American Rescue Plan, the cities collectively have a home consortium which can only be used to provide affordable housing or to create new affordable housing. And so there was an allocation of $1.7 million, $829. They were given to the 2 cities specifically to be used to address homelessness, was sort of the caveat with that. There were 4 different ways that it could be used. It could be supportive services. It could be used to do tenant-based rental assistance. You could use it to develop or support non-congregate shelters, help them get further developed. And you could also do tenant-based rental assistance. Excuse me, there was a 5th, capacity building for nonprofits that provide home-type services. It was really a very targeted group. It was veterans, it was homeless youth, it was people that were homeless or at risk of being homeless, folks who are paying more than 50% of their income, and they're at 30% area median income or below. Those are considered at risk. So it was a pretty specific group. There was a really exhaustive public process that was done. Jessica Wilson, who's on my staff, really led the charge on that, working collectively with Auburn. There was a lot of outreach to both municipal departments as well as local stakeholders, the public. In general, there were surveys put out, and at the end of the day, the recommendations for how those money should be spent coming from the public was Lewiston's share of that 1.7 million is $389,000. The recommendation is for $250,000 of that to be used sort of the way we historically have used home dollars, which is to help leverage low-income housing projects that are funded with low-income housing tax credits. This helps cover some of the gaps in the financing. Supportive services, we had $172,852. That would be for folks, we have not determined who, but folks like Trinity, who might want to up their game or have additional services. They are somebody who could apply for funding. And there was also $300,000 for non-congregate shelter development. And again, that was not specifically to any project. It was if that is something the council would like to move forward with, we would put a request for proposals on the street, and whatever gets brought back would be brought back to you for approval. There's also $76,537 that we're allowed to use for administering the program. So that's really the outcome from all that public engagement that Jessica really led the charge on. And with that, that's it. There's also, there's been public notice about this, 30-day public comment period. No comments were received. We had thought we would bring this to you back in July, and the way things worked out, we didn't. So we just put last week, we put a second public notice, not a public, it was that there's a public hearing tonight, but we didn't have to provide a 30-day public comment period. It was just putting people on notice that it would be heard tonight at a public hearing. With that, I've said what I've got to say. And questions or
discussion? Yeah, Councilor Pease.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This $300,000 that's going for shelter development, is there a process for requesting the funds for this?
Yeah, we would put a request for proposal saying there's funds available. Here's the rule book. Here's what you need to do. Back last time flies. I'm not sure if it was. I think it was last winter we had a proposal. You know, it has to be, you know, a bed, a bath, a commode. It has to be. It can't be just you're in a. You can't be at the in a big room. You've got to have single rooms with a bathroom associated with for each individual.
Well, I was thinking, the reason I asked that question, I was wondering how much notice and where we go to get an application for this, because I'd like to see some of this money go to the homeless students. And I designated X amount of dollars, but I don't know how much you can go for or any of that.
Yeah, that's something that would probably fall under the supportive services if you're not providing direct shelter to them, but you want to provide supportive services. That would fall under one of the categories that is being funded.
Okay, so this money that came down has nothing to do with the state-funded CBD funds that come to the city?
It is administered by the same HUD. It's Housing and Urban Development is who's the administrator of it. It's under that same rule book. There's a lot of rules and regulations associated with it. I'm not sure. Am I addressing your question or am I not?
Well, like the state received like $1.7 million. Our city received that for this similar program, but it all went to CDBG funds to be distributed. I'm wondering if that's part of it, this $1.3 million?
Yeah, no, it was 1.7 that both cities received. We received just shy of 800,000. That is our share of it. And it's different from CDBG. Similar process, but this specifically needs to be used to address homelessness.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so it's not that general CDBG category where we do lots of things with it. This is, we couldn't use this for public works projects. We couldn't really give it to somebody who deals with mental health issues or something. Is not necessarily, you'd have to make a tie back to it being homeless.
So I'm going to ask you something I probably can't ask you, but I'm going to anyway. I want you to make sure that I get that information as soon as it's available.
As far as when we put it on the streets?
Right.
Yep.
Put it on the street, application forms, how's
Yep.
that all gonna work?
We can do that.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilor Clement?
I guess a question for, I'm not sure, Director Jeffers or the administrator. Are we bound by these numbers as presented to us tonight for the purpose presented if we approve it? Can we amend this? Can we move the funds around for various projects?
You could, yes. This is sort of, here's the first blush, here's what is the outcome of all the public process that was engaged in. These were the top priorities. If we don't get any bids for congregate shelters, you could simply move the dollars. If you say we really don't want to do congregate shelters, you would have the opportunity to move that money now. We'd have to go through another public comment period. It's a 15-day public comment period, so we'd have to, there's a process, but it's really under the city council's purview.
In other words, if 2 weeks from now we decide that there was an approved widget sale somewhere, we could go out and buy $150,000 worth of approved widgets.
Only if it helps the homeless.
Well, that's what I'm saying. If it's approved under the program, yes.
But I mean, that is always what this comes back to. It has to somehow be tied back to the homeless. So yes, it's not the wide open dollars that CDBG are much more flexible. This is pretty specific on how it can be used.
One other question that has come up, has been asked of me, I couldn't answer, so I assume that maybe it would fall in your bailiwick. We appropriate a certain amount of money to a group.
Counselor, do you mind speaking to the microphone?
I've been told I speak too loud in the microphone. I'm trying to watch that, Mr. Mayor. If we allot a percentage of these funds to some group for an approved project of some kind, and is there a performance standard? Do they have to keep this program going for a certain period of time? Is there any possibility that the city is going to have to pay those funds back if it backfires?
That was one of the caveats when we were looking at the non-congregate shelter last winter, was that you needed to be, I can't remember the exact time frame. I believe it was 10 years, may have been longer, that you had to be showing you've got the operational capacity, you've got the experience to develop this. So that all those criteria would apply. It would be included in whatever we put out on the street, saying we've got money, we're looking for proposals, here's the criteria you need to meet. And we would have to go through that evaluation process. Do we have faith that they've got the developer?
I'll kind of drowned you out at first there, but what I'm hearing is that, yeah, there are strings, and they could be out there as long as 10 years?
Yeah, and don't go to the bank with that. I know it's a certain time frame. I suspect it's 10 years. I've not reviewed it recently.
Jessica's shaking her head, yes,
Okay.
10 years.
So the person who really keeps track of the rules is saying yes.
Thank you, Jessica. Councilor McCarthy?
Good evening. Could you go over some of the programs that are in the first two, the affordable rental development and the support services, what that money goes to?
Yeah, the affordable rental development is sort of the classic, Nathan Zanton has come to Lewiston saying, I'd like to develop a project, here's where I'd like to do it. I don't have enough money. The amount that's available from whether historic tax credits, their own money, the low-income housing tax credits, there's often a gap. And so home dollars are used, and out of a 35-unit project, you might have 2 units or 3 units that are designated as home. There's specific rules associated with those units. They have to report back to us, say, yes, I have an income qualified person who's living there. But that's how we have historically used home. What's a little bit unique about this one is the fact, once again, it has to be tied back to homelessness. And talking with the director of the Lewiston Housing Authority, many of the people who live in their projects that have project-based vouchers where they're Section 8, but they live with the building, they're not owned by the tenant. It belongs to the building. Most of the people who live in those units would qualify for eligibility under this. So that's first project, that's a likely, and whether it's Xanton, whether it's the Lewiston Housing Authority, Avesta, could be anybody. But that's the first way. Supportive services is more, whether it's New Beginnings, or whether it's Trinity, or whether it's somebody who starts up and says, yeah, we're willing to go out and, sort of call, go to tents and just check in and say, how you doing? What do you need for supportive services? Do you need toiletries? Do you need clothing? Can we provide you some guidance? So it's going to be an open, again, we've got money. Tell us what supportive services you're going to bring to this population. That one, decision-making would actually be under the Loan Qualification Committee, which is City Administrator, myself, Councilor Clement, and a local banker are on that committee. But that's who would make the decision on those supportive services. The first project would come back to the council, as any time we put home dollars into a big housing project. That's always comes to the council for approval.
What is the demand for those two categories, those first two categories?
I would say pretty large. I mean, that 250, we've got our regular home dollars, and we've been trying to line those up, trying to figure out how to use those with, whether it's a brand new project or it's something related to choice. We could certainly use, there's 250 we could use in a heartbeat. Will we use more? Yes. On the supportive services side, I'm not sure. I'm sure there is demand. I know, talking with Trinity, they're like the only diaper bank in the area. And if you're home, Mr. Potvin here was speaking, you're homeless, you're living in a car, you want plenty of diapers. So I think that's the type of use that would certainly be an eligible use.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Councilor Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you go back to the 10-year comment that you made? I'm not quite sure. What was exactly 10-year timeframe on a?
Whether it's a congregate shelter or a new affordable housing project, it needs to be there for 10 years paying the bills. It needs to be viable.
Okay. Now, is there a time frame on using this particular money? Let's say the non-congregate shelter development, $300,000. We don't get anybody that bites on that for a while. Is there a time frame on using that money?
There is a time frame. When does it sunset, Jess?
So September 21st of 2030 is the ultimate deadline to spend all funding. Once you contract a project, you have 4 years.
Okay. And is there a possibility, so something like when Councilor Pease suggests using towards the homeless youth in our community, the store next door, as Mr. Potvin had stated, that would be something that could use the support services piece. Could somebody like, excuse me, New Beginnings, who decided that they wanted to buy another house because they've only got, I think, a few beds, would that be something that would be considered a non-congregate? Would that be something that could be used?
We'd have to look at the design, but yes.
Yeah, okay. I'm just trying to put that out there because
Yeah, no,
I think our homeless youth is one of our, I very strongly want to support and help any way we can with the homeless situation we have in our community, but as we saw in our report, and we know that the cold weather is coming, and we have a lot of students out there, I would like to see some focus in that area if that were possible. Thank you.
Councilor LaChapelle.
Thank you. Director, following up on Councilor from Ward 6, on if we change any of these numbers around, they'd have to be done now so that we do not have to have another public hearing. Let's say we wanted to take 200,000 out of the affordable rental and dump it into the non-congregate. Can we do that now?
No. This is what has been, public notice has been provided. If you'd like to change the numbers now, we would need to go through a 15-day public comment period.
So who made that decision for those dollar amounts and how that's divided?
That was staff discussion based on the input received as part of the public process that Jessica went through, talking with our counterparts in Auburn, trying to figure out what made sense,
So shouldn't that have come before the council, or maybe I'm not understanding it, shouldn't that have come before the council in some kind of a workshop? Because now we're kind of we're stuck with these numbers by switching them around and starting the process all over again.
In hindsight, yes. It probably would have made more sense if we brought it to you in workshop on the abbreviated schedule in the summer. We did not, so my apologies on that.
But
To
is
say
this-
we're starting over, it adds 2 weeks. If you say we want to change the numbers, we've got a 2-week public
But were
notice
we
process.
not talking about these same numbers when the Shelter Committee came up and asked for, I think it's 125,000? Don't nail me on, is this the same program that they were asking money from?
It's the same pot of money, but part of the reason at that point we were resistant is, look, there's a whole process we need to go through. This is what we needed to get to be able to say there's money available, as opposed to somebody saying, hey, I see there's money, we want a piece of it. We had to go through this whole public process. Talking to stakeholders, Jessica really led the charge on that. But so that's why we could not have spent those monies at that time. These were the needs that were identified.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And as far as to my fellow, well, this is going to come back to the council at some point. We're not even got to public comment.
Right, yes. Oh, I get what you mean. Like, yeah, we're voting tonight, but yeah, we still have to go to public comment. It will come back to us. Okay. I guess any further discussion from the council before we go to public comment? We are now going to public comment for this agenda item. Any public comment? And okay, now we're back. Councilor LaChapelle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too have some concerns, and Mr. Potman, I'd like to have time to look at these numbers, and I'd like to make some changes to these numbers. And I'm not prepared to vote on this right now. There are a lot of options, moving $300,000 into affordable rental units and develop it right now. There's a dire need for it, from my understanding, and it can eat up more than the $550,000 that we'd put into it. Do we take $50,000 and add it into the support services that are currently there to help Trinity Jubilee? Or do we get the affordable rental development and put another $200,000 into non-congregate shelter and try to push for a shelter for the youth, talking to whomever? This is a great opportunity for us, and I'd like to have a little more time. And we have more time, so we don't, my understanding, we have another 4 years before we have to make a decision on this. So I'd rather not rush it. I would just assume table this for a short period of time, or open to any other suggestions, so we can look at this better before we move forward on it. I guess I'm definitely not in favor of voting on it right now. So I would lean more towards putting it off, tabling it, whatever our other fellow councilors would see fit.
Director Jeffers, I have some questions here. So the non-congregate shelter development, I mean, if councilors were concerned about youth, for instance, New Beginnings could apply for that, correct? Yes.
Right.
And then what, just a point of clarification, so we don't have 4 years, I guess, when do we need to decide? I assume a 15-day delay would be feasible, or when do we have to decide that we're accepting the funds and what buckets we're putting them into?
Well,
Is there a deadline for that?
We're joined at the hip with Auburn on this, for better or worse. They are the lead on this. They already have approved the budget as presented on August 1st. They've got plans to use all of their money for supportive services. They will be hiring city staff to do that for a period of 3 years. They're eager to get going. I let them know a couple of weeks back that I was not sure this council would be good to go as it was, and we might have some changes. But I would not encourage delaying for months. I think it's, let's make some decisions how you want to do it, and do it in the relatively near future. You have the public notice and take action in September would be my request to the council. Not to stick you in a box, but there's money that's here. The money's been allocated. It's ours. We just need to figure out how to best use it.
Thank you for that clarification. Councilor McCarthy?
I agree with Councilor Chappelle about tabling this. Could this be moved to include in our workshop for next Tuesday?
Most definitely.
Then that's what I would push for, that we table it at this point in time so we can have an in-depth discussion, get a full presentation on the money and how it's used, and then we can discuss the allocations and then move forward from there.
Councilor Clement?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to take a moment and express my extreme displeasure in the way this came to us, that we weren't consulted, and we found out about this at the 11th hour, and it's like putting the gun right to us. I don't appreciate that, and it shouldn't happen again. Thank you.
Councilor Pease?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My only comment is if we could get Mr. Jeffers to bring the mic closer to him and speak a hair louder, because we got this thing going on behind us, and I'm trying to lip sync. It doesn't work. It's not working.
I'm usually not heard, so my apologies.
Thank you.
Councilor Scott?
Thank you. So you said that Auburn voted on this on August 1st, and they chose to use all of their funds for support services? Is that what you said? Now, was that a decision by the group that you had or was that the city council's vote on that to make that decision?
That was city council's vote, and honestly, I'm not sure how much involvement, I think they'd heard it, I think they were aware of it, but ultimately,
Why
council.
don't you go up to the microphone up here?
Is this one?
You can't hear you.
Ah,
Yeah, I can't hear you either, so.
okay.
Please join us up front, Director Jeffers.
That looks live, sounds live. Yeah, so Auburn did it. I'm not sure how much involvement their council had prior to their action, but they did take action on August 1st.
I'm wondering if I might continue, if we could have that information to see, was the Auburn Council given the suggestion to put all the money towards the services, if they had a conversation about that, on how they allocated that funds to just that one particular thing? Because I would also like an opportunity to talk about this a little further. I don't want to wait, but I'm willing to do the next Tuesday also and have that conversation. I'm just curious as to how Auburn handled that situation. Not that I want to copy Auburn, just putting that out there.
Councilor Jelinas?
I would just concur with that. I mean, it's 1 week, before we come back together again to talk. I'm not really about delaying this. This is a big opportunity, like Councilor LaChapelle said, for us, and so I think it's going to be really important that we really put some good discussion behind this. And the delay is a week. It's not more than that. So I think we're ready to take. Well, we won't be able to vote. That's true.
Councilor Clement, did you have something to add?
Yes, I'd like to move to amend this whole thing to postpone it until our workshop next Tuesday for final decision.
So we're motion to table. Okay. Administrator Hunter?
What I would recommend is you would want to continue the public hearing to September's meeting, September 6th. That way we don't have to re-advertise the public hearing.
Does that, well, you mentioned Director Jeffers, you mentioned the 15-day.
Well, yeah, so what we would do is workshop it next Tuesday, have it in September, actually have council take action on whatever you come to. At that point, actually, Jess, 15 days before the meeting or after? Before. So we would do the workshop. You would say, here's how we'd like to use the money. We would then do a 15-day public notice, public comment period, and then we would come back to you. So it'd probably be towards the end of September.
Right, it would be the first, we could add it to the agenda for the first meeting after the public comment period was over. Am I understanding that correctly? Councilor Clement?
That being the case, Mr. Mayor, I would amend my comment that we continue the public hearing to next Tuesday at 6 o'clock to discuss this
No,
further?
sorry.
Clarification, Lincoln. The public comment period, we've held public comment period after we voted before, and then we bring it back if there are public comments.
We have done that?
Yes, so we can still vote on, and let the public comment period run past that. And if there are issues with the public comment period, we would bring that back on the September 20th meeting.
Okay.
Administrator Hunter, am I understanding that we would vote on something and then have a public comment period?
Well, that we can start the public comment period after the workshop. It would continue, and we could make the vote subject to positive feedback from the public comment period. And if there are any exceptions to the public comment period, we would return it on September 20th.
Does that meet the requirements for this funding?
I think we have to double check. It's just two different things, so I don't dare speak to that at this point without checking the rules.
Okay, I guess I would like clarification that that would be
I would think
acceptable.
worst case, September 20th, we would be coming back for the definitive vote. If we can do it beforehand, I mean, ideally, you have your public comment before you have the vote, but we could move it along if we just want to. So, and this historically has not had a lot of public comment. Typically, we do not get a lot of public comment on the use of home funds.
I guess given all of that, Administrator Hunter and Madam Clerk, what is the appropriate motion needed here so we can discuss it
I would move
during?
it to continue the public hearing to September 6th. If worse comes to worse, we take a vote to continue it to the 20th.
Fair enough.
I will agree with that.
That's what Councilor Clement has recommended at this point, and it's now been seconded. I don't think there's any further discussion. Councilor Harriman?
Does it matter that there are only 14 days between our workshop next week and the September 6th meeting?
That's the
But
15 days we're talking about that they're going to clarify.
So it would run over by one day
And if worse comes to worse, if there's heart failure on HUD's, we continue it till the 20th.
Okay, thank you.
It just saves us from re-advertising and re-advertising.
Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Counselor from Ward 1?
Yes.
Ward 2?
Yes.
Ward 3?
Yes.
Ward 4?
Yes.
Ward 5? Ward 6?
Yes.
Ward 7?
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7-0.
Thank you, Director Jeffers. I appreciate it. And thank you, Jessica. Madam Clerk, item number 9.
Item number 9, public hearing and final passage regarding an amendment to the Buildings and Building Regulations Ordinance regarding the rental registration program. Requested action that the proposed amendment to the City Code of Ordinances, Chapter 18, Buildings and Building Regulations, Article 6, Registration Requirement for Multifamily Buildings, Section 18-202, Applicability Exceptions, receive final passage by a roll call vote.
May I have a motion? Councilor Clement, followed by Councilor LaChapelle. Discussion? Public comment? Back to the council. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Counselor from Ward 1?
Yes.
Ward 2?
Yes.
Ward 3?
Yes.
Ward 4?
Yes.
Ward 5?
Yes.
Ward 6?
Yes.
Ward 7?
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7-0.
Agenda item number 10.
Item number 10, public hearing and final passage to amend the administrative ordinance regarding the committee structure of the Lewiston Public Art Committee. Requested action that the proposed amendments to the City Code of Ordinances, Chapter 2, Administration, Article 4, Boards, Commissions, Committees, and Bureaus, Division 4, Lewiston Public Art Committee, receive final passage by a roll call vote.
May I have a motion?
So moved.
Councilor Jelinas, second by Councilor Clement. One question I had, so I thought we agreed that duly elected would simply be elected. Or no, we would take out duly elected and would just be a city councilor. The idea being if someone was appointed and then also would need to be appointed to this committee for whatever reason. I thought we hashed that out at the last meeting. Does that ring a bell to people?
Yeah, I do remember that now.
The idea that it's a counselor that is appointed and not elected would also be acceptable.
Sure, okay, and I do recall that conversation, you're right. So all we did for the agenda packet was just pull the old language from the July meeting, so we can certainly make that change. That's not a significant change to the overall intention of the motion.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councilor Herman?
Yeah, thank you. That was my concern as well. I seem to recall that we did that as a friendly amendment last time, and we just struck the words duly elected, because, yeah, I agree. I don't think that we should be setting up different standards for counselors who are elected and counselors who are appointed. They should be on equal footing. So
Thank you.
I think a city councilor would accomplish the same thing.
Further comment from the council? Public comment? Back to the council. Councilor Clement?
Then we are looking at item 7 under this to read a city councilor, period. I have no,
That's my understanding.
no problem.
Yeah. All right. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Counselor from Ward 1?
Yes.
Ward 2?
Yes.
Ward 3?
Yes.
Ward 4?
Yes.
Ward 5?
Yes.
Ward 6?
Yes.
Ward 7?
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7 to 0.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Item number 11.
Item number 11, order authorizing the city administrator to sign the Johnson Controls Incorporated Performance Contract for Energy Performance. Requested action to approve the order authorizing the city administrator to sign the Johnson Controls Incorporated Performance Contract for Energy Performance.
Yes, may I have a motion? And thank you, Councilor Pease, and then second by Councilor Scott. Did, Councilor McCarthy. I thought I heard you, Councilor Scott. My apologies. Discussion? Or, sorry, before that, Director Brenchick, please kick us off.
Good evening. This is a continuation from the June 21st workshop when Johnson Controls came in and explained what the performance contract was about. This would be securing the services for Johnson Controls, which was put in place by an RFP process to implement the energy savings projects at a net zero cost to taxpayers. So they're guaranteeing the performance of the work that they'll be doing. There's a big, long contract that's been reviewed by our legal staff. They are guaranteeing the performances, and then we track it, and the first year is not included in this calculation because that's when you're doing the projects, you're not sure when you're going to start. The group will also be looking at any grant funding that's possible from situations that we don't know exist yet to the existing energy conservation grants that the state is putting out. They will apply on our behalf for those. It will reduce our debt obligation. So the next steps would be for the administrator to sign this contract and for us to go out with an RFP on who will finance it, and that will be guaranteed by Johnson Controls. So there'll be no payments this year, and they're looking at several different areas of energy conservation that they explained in the workshop.
Thank you. Council discussion? Public comment? Back to the council. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Excuse me, Counselor from Ward 1?
Yes.
Ward 2?
Yes.
Ward 3?
Yes.
Ward 4?
Yes.
Ward 5?
Yes.
Ward 6?
Yes.
Ward 7?
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7 to 0.
Thank you, Director Brenchick. Item number 12.
Item number 12, order authorizing the disposition of the Matobian Avenue Phase 2 temporary turnaround, part of the L&L Estates subdivision, and direct the city administrator to execute any all documents to complete the transfer of the property to the respective lot owners. Requested action to approve the order authorizing the disposition of the Matobian Avenue Phase 2 temporary turnaround, part of the L&L Estates subdivision, and direct the city administrator to execute any and all documents to complete the transfer of the property to the respective lot owners.
May I have a motion? Councilor Harriman, followed by Councilor Pease. Councilor LaChapelle.
I'm going to recuse myself since I am L&L Estates, so I'm just going to remove myself from the dais at this point.
Okay. Is that Yeah, is that necessary? Or, I mean, no, I mean recusing yourself, or do you want to continue to stay seated, or?
Suggested that I move from the seat.
If you care to.
Sit down here and make faces
Discussion from the rest of the council at this point. Director Brenchek, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, just this is also a continuation of a workshop or an agenda item that we had on July 19th, where we discontinued the Phase 2 turnaround. It's just giving the property and deeding the property back to the lot owner, where it has expended now to Phase 3 with a turnaround that will come back and do when he goes to Phase 4.
Thank you. Public comment for this agenda item. Back to the council. And if I remember from last time, I'll be voting, Madam Clerk?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Counselor from Ward 1,
Yes.
Ward 2,
Yes.
Ward 3,
Yes.
Ward 5,
Yes.
Ward 6,
Yes.
Ward 7,
Yes.
and Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 7-0.
Please join us. Agenda item number 13.
Item number 13, to discuss and direct city administration to prepare a warming and cooling center policy. Requested action to discuss and direct city administration to prepare a warming and cooling center policy.
May I have a motion?
So moved.
Councilor Scott, or Councilor Harriman, sorry.
Second.
Councilor Scott.
Oh, I thought you had one. Sorry.
Discussion. Councilor Harriman.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it would be, we've had a few severely hot days over the past few weeks, and there was some, we don't have a policy in place right now, so there was a lot of discussion going back and forth as to what the city would do to respond to the extreme weather. So I think it would behoove us to come up with a policy so that we know, if this, then this, and so that there's not, not confusion going forward. Thank you.
Councilor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't think there's enough information that we have to move forward with trying to create a policy. My fear is making a policy based on incomplete information could lock the city into spending more money that they don't need to. My recommendation would be to continue on a case-by-case basis and track usage, both when it's a cooling or when it's a heating center, and see whether the need or the demand is even there. I know we had it on a Thursday at the library, and we had 2 adults and 2 children that spent a total of 5 minutes there, grabbed a couple of bottles of water and left. Then we had the discussion whether we were going to do it on Sunday, when it would cost the city overtime for, I believe, 4 employees for 3 or 4 hours, which if the same usage was there, that's a total waste of money. So I would like to see us just continue with a case-by-case basis, be able to adjust on the fly as far as if there's a big demand, then we open it up more often. If there's no demand, then we don't open it up. And then, once we have the data on usage, when we can go forward and make a policy, because I don't want to lock us into a policy that's going to cost us money if there's no demand there. So that's my feeling. Thank you.
So I'll weigh in here. A number of things. So our library is already, pretty much used as the de facto warming and cooling center for the city. And since the library was already open on Thursday, and library guests could access any part of the library, not just Callahan Hall, Yeah, I mean, I can see where, if, you know, there were certainly people downstairs escaping the heat. They just didn't all run upstairs. And yeah, I do think that in a period of a heat advisory, we should be doing something for, you know, our most vulnerable residents, you know, kids and senior citizens, and especially in a case where there's rising utility costs and so forth. Further discussion from the council? Councilor Jelinas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So as I see it, this is really just for us to think about putting a policy together. The concern that I have with case by case is that, you know, what if we disagree, right? I mean, I think that, you know, we did something on Thursday. You can't compare a Thursday to a Sunday. You can't look at data that we collected on Thursday and compare that to a Sunday, because a Thursday in Lewiston is very different than a Sunday in Lewiston, just based on what's open and what's not. I could be old school and say, gosh, you know, when I was cold, you know, I just had to like get tough and go out there in the cold. And when I was hot, you know, I just had to, like, you know, get a bucket of water or whatever. But I think the other thing that's important for us to remember is that the level of homelessness in our community was not what it is today when we were young. And so I think about that, and I think about the climate here, not just the hot, you know, we're talking about this now in direct response to a heat wave that we had come through. I think about it more, frankly, in response to the cold days that we have. I would be curious about a couple things. I'd be curious to know what other cities are doing. I'd be curious to know, you know, what kind of policy we could pull together. I don't even feel necessarily this has to be something that the city of Lewiston does. Could it be that an RFP is put out there or something like that for a nonprofit? I mean, I believe that it doesn't have to lie right on the shoulders of the city necessarily, but I think as a city, we need to be cognizant that something should be done. And I think if ever there's a time for us to lean into some of the community agencies that we have, this might be an example of that. Because I really believe that if we got some dialogue going with some of our resources here that we have, that we know we could come up with a solution to this. You know, I would love to see more discussion around this, I guess, and I think that the development of a policy might result in that.
Councilor LaChapelle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. May I address another counselor in regards to, well, Stephanie's in charge of the health committee or something like that.
Stephanie, I'm sorry, Councilor Jelinas, could you please tell us the committee that you're on?
I'm the chair of the Lewiston Area Public Health Committee.
Yes.
Now, I'm just wondering if that's something that they would look at, the Public Health Committee, and give us some input on it. And I like your train of thought, looking at, I know.
If you can please talk into the microphone, thank you.
I understand Pathway Vineyard Church looked at opening up showers and stuff like that at one time, and there was some concern in the last council on having a church do something to that effect. But I really think that that is the job of the church and the job of the neighbors on a situation like this. And I like your train of thought. It's encouraging that type of interaction. I'm not necessarily in favor of paying 5 people double time at the public library and using the library as a shelter. The library is not a shelter. It's it happens to turn that way, but I like the train of thought, so I would be more inclined to throw this over to your committee and just get some thoughts or input from it, if that's even something we want to consider. It was not a heat wave. It was 90 degrees. And so we haven't, it wasn't a heat wave. It wasn't a sub-zero. We've only had it below zero maybe twice in the last 2 years. Yes, it was warm. Yes, it was uncomfortable because we're used to 40 degrees. It hit 90 degrees. It was not the end of the world. The sky wasn't falling. I did not have air conditioning in my bedroom that night. I sweat. Yes, it was hot. No question about it. So I'm not in favor of moving forward on some kind of a policy. I think I'd like to see it go over to that committee and get some input from them. It's just my opinion.
Councilor Clement.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The councilor on my left has brought up an interesting point. I think that the Public Health Committee would be the ideal place to have them gather some information.
Sorry, Councilor, do you mind talking?
I'll try. I don't want to blow anybody out of their speakers or anything. I think that she raises a very valid point. Public Health Committee would be the place to bring this up. I disagree with the assertion that we need to be using the library all the time, particularly when we have to pay 4 or 5 individuals a half day's wages at time and a half. We have, as Councilor LaChapelle mentioned, we have agencies, we have nonprofits, we have religious agencies. The last term, one councilor raised an objection one time saying that they didn't think that a religious-based organization should be involved with anything with the city. It was not the council, it was one councilor, and that councilor was, in my estimation, way out of place when they said that. We have people who are willing to do something. I go back to my grandmother, who was here for 99 years. She said the government shouldn't be doing things for you. You have your neighbors, you have the church, you have the Grange. They should help you out. I don't know if we got any Grange around anymore, but if we've got a church and neighbors that are willing to do something, I say let's go for it. I'm not in favor of spending a bunch of overtime for this, unless there's a very unusual case. 90? No, not unusual. Last heat wave I went through in New Hampshire was over 100 for 4 days in a row. That, to me, is a heat wave. 10 degrees makes a difference.
Councillor Scott?
Thank you. I would agree with Councilor Jelinas. I appreciate that perspective, that we take a little bit better, bigger look at this and see what else we can use to help with this. I'm a tightwad, I'm sorry. I had a difficult time paying overtime for something that I wasn't sure was going to be used. So I'm wondering if we could possibly figure out where we might be able to do this, a better location that's possibly then Callahan Hall, if that's possible, if we can get some nonprofits involved. But I'd also wonder if we can get some statistics from Auburn in respect to their cooling center, because I'd like to know how often that's used for them. They've had one going for a bit, right?
I can speak to the first one, when we first started talking about that. And
What time frame? When was that?
that was the first discussion we had about, I don't remember the exact date.
Oh,
It's
you're
the
talking
date
about
that
one
you
this
had
year.
called me, yes.
Right, yes, yes,
Yes, a
okay.
couple weeks ago. And then we did follow, because they had the cooling shelter at the ice arena.
Yeah.
And looking at staffing and what they did over there, they did not have anybody from either community or any of the surrounding communities, because they opened it up, that was there, that attended strictly as a cooling shelter. People that were there to do their normal free skate, to do hockey practice. There was nobody that showed up just for the cooling shelter.
And if I might follow up, they opened this up to Lewiston, Auburn, like outside, like,
They
right?
did not put any parameters on that. They just said they were opening a cooling shelter.
Did they
I-
advertise that, do you know, around so that
Yes,
everybody
and-
could?
Yes.
That's what I'm concerned about,
It was
too.
in the newspaper, and I believe they advertised, or they notified EMA, Emergency Management, that they were going to do that. I can't speak, because I wasn't here, if they opened up a cooling shelter for the most recent, when we were looking at Thursday. He's checking. To answer another question, what are other municipalities doing? It's funny, that has been an interesting topic on the administrator's listserv recently. It's been a variety of discussions going either way. The biggest issue, and it's the issue that we're having, is the pay and the staffing of it. No cooling shelter? Oh, okay. Not only there's the pay issue, but then there's trying to find people that actually will volunteer to work that. This is not in anybody's job description right now, so it's strictly a voluntary basis to get earnings. Right now, the city clerk's having trouble with voter registration. We're having trouble, filling normal positions throughout the city. Police is one that you're most familiar with, planning and code in their planning position. Public Works as well has had, so we can't even get people to volunteer for the normal overtime capacity. That's my bigger concern, is we can do a policy, but if we can't get anybody to work, that's a whole other ballgame. And so I would certainly hate to advertise for something, yes, I could be there and I'm not worried about that, but it takes more than just me.
And if I may continue, one more question, please.
Please continue,
And I
Counselor.
think that's information that we need to know. So, can we have just 2 municipal employees? Do we need a police officer there? Do we need to have, what if there's an emergency or something were to happen? I think that we need to have that information before we were to set anything in policy, to figure out exactly what would be needed for something like this. And is it something that we need? I would be more concerned about our winter months and some of the cold periods versus the hot periods, but I think we need more information on that. Thank you.
Counselor Jelinas, is this something that you think the Public Health Committee would be willing to take a look at?
Certainly, we would be happy to do that.
Counselor LaChapelle?
Councilor Janice, I guess I'd be looking for guidance from that health committee and saying, yes, I think we should do something, or there's not really a need right here. I say need. The city cannot be the all for everybody. We just can't do it. And where's the line? Where do we draw? And I would encourage that committee to be looking at the private parts, the private sectors, the ice arena or something to that effect, and how can we encourage that type, and just make the recommendation on if we have a massive cold snap. Now, granted, we have an emergency and half the city burns down or something like that. That's a totally different subject altogether.
We're not planning on that, by the way.
No.
Counselor Harriman.
Thank you. So a few thoughts on this. Just to correct the info on the data, we have had 3 extreme heat advisories so far this summer issued by the National Weather Service, and that's when the heat index is, I believe it's above 95 degrees, and they specifically say to remain in an air-conditioned room or you are at risk of heat injury or illness. And not everybody can do that. They may not be able to afford an air conditioner. They may not be able to afford the electricity to run it. And the people who tend to be the most affected are often the elderly. And we did pass a resolution earlier this term, supporting our seniors. Another thought is that we can't do a case by case and collect data if we don't do it. So if that's what I think policy would help to address, is that it says what we will do when things happen. The last Sunday that we had a heat advisory, we didn't have a cooling center, so we couldn't gauge the need. As Councilor Jelinas said, Thursdays are very different than Sundays. Thursdays, the library is already open, the buses are running. Sunday, the library is not open, there's no bus. I don't believe the taxi service runs on Sunday, but I'm not 100% sure about that. So people can't really get to other places like they could, you could go to Walmart for an hour or something and cool down. And people can't really do that if they don't have transportation. And then as far as overtime, I'm not sure what we spend for public works to respond to extreme weather, to plow the streets and such. I do know that I was taking a look at the budget, and we pay thousands of dollars every day for police and fire in overtime to respond to emergencies. And I don't think that a handful of times a year to spend a little bit more in overtime to respond to other emergencies is unreasonable if it can keep people from either freezing or overheating. I just think it's the most basic thing we can do is just to keep people alive and from becoming ill. Thank you.
Councillor Clement?
Just very briefly, Mr. Mayor, I think if we're going to do something like this, we have to be very careful what we staff with. We, as a government, are viewed as having deep pockets. If we don't have the proper people there and somebody suffers an injury or dies, maybe because they've suffered from heat exhaustion or heat stroke before arrival, and we don't have an EMT, all of these things. It's not something to go into willy-nilly. I would like to move that we have the Public Health Committee, that we ask the Public Health Committee to investigate this and come back to us with recommendations as to what, if any, types of shelter we should have, who should operate these shelters, and be involved in the staffing of them. I think that's more than fair, and I think that's the way that we should address this. And if that's what required, I'll put that in the form of a motion. If somebody's willing to second it, we can move on.
There's 4 of us who just raised their hand.
Okay, so we have a motion, and we have seconded by Councillor LaChapelle. And yeah, no, I'm okay with that. Or yes, Councillor Scott. If that's okay, Councillor Clement. I know we have a motion on the table here.
I received an email today from, about the Lewiston Senior Advisory Council that's going to be starting to meet in September. And I think that this is a subject that I'd be more than willing to put on the agenda immediately and find out what our senior citizens in our community are thinking about. And if they feel that it's a necessity, I think that that would be an important piece to add too. When we speak about what our senior citizens need for, I think we should ask them directly. And so I think that that's an important piece, and I can definitely add that to the conversation right away.
Administrator Hunt, did you have something to add?
Just to clarify, if we could use the nomenclature center instead of shelter, I'd appreciate that.
So amended.
Madam Clerk, can you please restate the motion and then call the vote?
Sure. The motion is to refer this matter to the Public Health Committee, to ask them to investigate this issue and to report back with recommendations such as who should operate, potential locations, and other related factors. Counselor from Ward 1?
Yes.
Ward 2?
Yes.
Ward 3?
Yes.
Ward 4?
Yes.
Ward 5?
Yes.
Ward 6?
Yes.
Ward 7?
Yes.
Motion passed with a vote of 7-0.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Agenda item number 14.
Item number 14, city staff serving on ad hoc committees, subcommittees, boards, commissions, and/or special projects. Requested action to approve the directive that no city staff member shall serve on any ad hoc committee, subcommittee, board, commission, and/or special project unless pre-approved by the city administrator or the city council. Further, the city administrator is hereby directed to notify the city council of any and all requests for such appointments or use of city staff. City staff will not be allowed to serve on city time without pre-approval.
So have a motion. Councillor McCarthy, followed by Councillor LaChapelle. Yeah, so I appreciate the expertise city staff provide addressing our city's most challenging issues. If we need a reset, I'm available, like I always am, to speak to administration. I'm happy to have that conversation. This conversation is not appropriate for this setting. This order is overkill, and frankly, it could be an overreach of the council's power. Councilor Harriman?
Thank you. I'm just curious as to which committees this actually applies to, because it says ad hoc committee, subcommittee, board, commission, and/or special project. So which committees are those?
Councilor Jelinas?
I'll just use an example, we have a subcommittee that meets out of the Lewiston Area Public Health Committee, and it's called the Rally for Recovery Committee. And in fact, there is someone on the city that sits on it, not on our request. I never asked for the person to sit there, but they're there, and that's great. We appreciate it. I'm not, but I've just, as I read this, I thought, well, that's curious to me because I feel like sometimes on some of the committees I've served on, there are city people on those committees, but I've not asked for those people on the committee. So I don't really understand this either. I guess I'm a little bit confused. as well? I'm trying to understand it. Or maybe
Can-
I've broken some rules, but honestly, I've never really invited them. They just were there. So,
Councilor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My understanding is this is to just get pre-approval from either the city council or the city administrator before people serve, so that city resources can be monitored and used efficiently. That's my take on it. It's not to prevent people from serve, it's just it's just so the city administrator has the ability to say, well, we can't afford that person at this point in time, they can't serve. I think it's more of, the administrator, it's not to pick and choose who serves on any of these committees, it's a matter of managing city resources. That's my take on the idea behind this. Thank you.
Councilor LaChapelle, did you have anything?
Certainly. I'm total favor of this. We have dwindling staff, and the more committees that we ask some of these, Director Hediger, the Chief of Police, they have jobs to do, and we continue to put them on different committees. I know the different committees that I've served over the years, and there's been, it was actually Chief O'Malley at the time, there was a housing committee a few years ago, and he had the chief, the deputy chief, and a sergeant there, and that was at a request. And they have things that they have to do. They can't be on all these different committees. We tasked the city administrator to run this city, and all of a sudden, that city administrator turns around and half their staff's gone because there's, on a regular basis, and to, vacation, sick time, whatever, and now you're losing them on different committees. I think this just gives the city administrator an opportunity just to control the staff and the usage. And if this council feels that it's important enough that we direct the city administrator that we want all heads of the department on that committee, so be it. That's the decision of the council. I encouraged, years ago, I had a couple committee meetings that I called, the police department and the lieutenant came over and they were part of that meeting. I was not a city councilor at the time, but they were just there. And I think that there has to be some kind of a chain of command here, folks, that we can't just say, hey, I need you to come over to this committee meeting. And it's just more of a control. So I'm definitely in support of this. Thank you.
Councilor Herman?
Thank you. I guess I don't quite understand the reasoning. I thought that serving on the city committees was part of city staff's job, and I don't see how, frankly, the committees I serve on, I don't see how we would get a whole lot done without city staff. Their expertise and their knowledge is pretty invaluable. And I also don't, this seems to be muddying the waters between, city council and city staff. I thought that city council was, for lack of a better term, the boss of the city administrator, and then the city administrator was the boss of the staff. So I just don't see how the city council can direct city staff as to what they can do and can't do. I'm just kind of not understanding the purpose and the way this would be put together.
Councilor Clement.
Perhaps I can shed some light on that. The city charter says that we employ one person. The city council, the 7 city councilors, employ one person. That is our city administrator. The city administrator is the sole person in city employ that gets to direct city staff. We can't tell her, we want this, we want that, unless we do it as a body. Nobody, any of the city councilors, nor the mayor, has the authority to direct city staff to do anything. The mayor has the authority to appoint people, but they can serve at the will of the city administrator. Lately, I'm told that that isn't happening, that there are being appointments made and the city administrator is not finding out about it. I know of a case very recently where one person was asked for, but was denied because that would have emptied a city office. That person taken away to perform some function on a committee or a subcommittee, whatever it was. So I think we have to be very careful. We don't have the resources now that we had even 2 or 3 years ago. And a case in point here, a minute ago, I mentioned Director Hediger. Director Hediger is appointed to this committee, this subcommittee. We have got some very specific directives out to planning and code enforcement of what we want done. Can't get it done if he's moving around on all these subcommittees all the time. Our police chief has got enough in his plate right now that he doesn't need to be a member of every committee. So what we're doing here is merely putting it out that person can be appointed, but they can't serve unless there's pre-approval from the city administrator. And we're directing the city administrator to let us know anytime that a request like that is made. We're enforcing the charter. We're not exceeding our bounds. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Councilor Herman, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I mean, it says here unless pre-approved by the city administrator or the city council, and I guess that's part of what's tripping me up is that, you know, why is the city council telling staff what they can and can't do? I'm just not, and I still don't understand the scope of what this applies to. Like, you know, it says ad hoc committee, subcommittee, board, commission, special project. Is that all the committees we have? You know, what specific issues is this trying to address?
Councilor Scott.
Thank you. So I've got to say, I would be very concerned as a city councilor if I heard that any other city councilor or the mayor or anybody was asking staff to do stuff without going through our city administrator first. Having been 6 years on the school committee, the school committee's sole responsibility is to be the boss of the superintendent. The superintendent delegates where staff members are used and how they are used. And I have always been under the belief that that's the way the city council, and as I read the charter, is the way that that is appropriated, that we allow the city administrator to make the decision. If we are going to ask the city administrator to put together a committee because we want strategic planning around economic development, I would trust that the city administrator knows that we're going to need a Misty Parker or somebody that is an expert in that personal place. I would be very uncomfortable, though, if I found out or heard that that wasn't happening, that she wasn't knowing. And I'm kind of hearing that maybe is what is being said here, that maybe there's some ask of being used of city staff without going through the city administrator. That I would be very uncomfortable with. Now, I don't know in this particular piece if we're going to do policy and we're going to do an ordinance, because we do already have some of that language already in our city charter. I would kind of concur with Councilor Harriman that I'm not particularly sure that we need to have city council approve who is on a committee. I trust the city administrator would choose the correct person to be on whatever subcommittee, board, or whatever. That being said, I would hope that our city administrator, if that was being abused in any way by a councilor, a mayor, or anybody, whatever the position is, whether it's happening before, it's happening in the future, I don't know, that city administrator would be telling the rest of the council that this is happening and we need to have a discussion. And I would think that that would be something that we would have a discussion of and we would be stopping, because I would hate to see any city staff being used when they're supposed to be doing their job that they're doing on the whim of somebody wanting to do something, or I have an idea, I want to do a committee on this, I'm going to go ask Mary Ann to do this for me, and then I'm going to go upstairs and ask. I wouldn't want that to happen. So I would be very concerned about that happening. I don't know, I want to make sure that if we're going to put any policy in place, that it's worded correctly and we're making sure that we're doing it for an appropriate reason. And I feel like we're getting a little bit of nuance here as to why it's really being put out there. So you understand what I'm saying? I want to know exactly what we're doing here. Thank you.
Councilor Jelinas.
from my reading, I think this is not really a policy or anything. We're just looking at a directive. I thought this directive existed. I mean, I was being half flip in my earlier comment, half flip not. I probably wasn't clear, but, you know, I really just assumed this is the way things were done. This was the directive that was in motion. And when I was being flip, I was simply just saying that there's city staff on all these committees that I've served on, but I've not asked any of them to serve on it. So I don't know. It's, you know, I know that I'm not overreaching in terms of asking people, and I would never do that anyway. But so I guess my confusion with the requested action to approve this directive is, I guess I just assume this is already happening. Clearly, it's not if it's come before council today. But I'm just going to say that when I read it in the packet earlier, I was like, what? It didn't make any sense to me. So that's all.
So, LaChapelle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree, but we have reaffirmed 3 other policies in our books already this year. This is just reaffirming a policy and assuring the city administrator that the city administrator has the authority already, and we're just reaffirming that the city administrator has that authority and encouraging the city administrator to use that authority and place that edict. We have already reaffirmed 3 other policies this year that have already been in there, that we've just repeated it. There's nothing wrong with this, and it's just making due notice. These things are happening right now, and it has to stop. And I wanted to reaffirm and let the city administrator know that she has the support of the entire council, that the city administrator has the right and duty to perform her responsibilities to the fullest without taking backlash from anybody else. So we're just reaffirming what is in the books right now. This is nothing new, just reaffirming. Just thought, well, maybe if it would behoove the city administrator, whomever that person was, if the entire council directed the city administrator to form a committee and she said no, or that person said no, would not be a very smart thing for the administrator to do. And I don't think any administrator in that position would do it. So I have no problem just taking the city council part out. I'm fine with that. But if there's not a good administrator out there that would refuse the request of a sitting city council. So it's currently happening. I think we need to stop it and just reaffirm and not make the city administrator, whomever that person would be now or in the future, feel like they're in a jam up at times. So I just want to reaffirm that.
Councilor McCarthy.
Administrator Hunter, is there anything in this that you have an issue with?
I know you talked about the pre-approval of the city council. I guess the only tie-in that would require that is an unappropriated financial impact. That would require city council pre-approval. So it's good to have that in there. I guess the question is, knowing that that's what I would use it for, or if there were majority responses on either side of the subject, I think I would request the city council to pre-approve something to get more of a general or majority consensus on a direction.
So you're comfortable if we go ahead and pass this as is?
That would be the discretion of the council.
Mr. Mayor?
Thank you.
I ask we move the question.
We have a motion on the table to put the question to a vote. Do we have a second? And then Madam Clerk, it takes a supermajority to move that, correct?
It does, yes, a 2/3 vote, yeah.
Okay, all right. Please call the vote.
And so again, just for clarification, the motion before you is to move the question. Counselor from Ward 1,
Yes.
Ward 2,
Yes.
Ward 3, Ward 4,
Yes.
Ward 5,
Yes.
Ward 6,
Yes.
Ward 7.
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 6 to 1. So now the motion before you is the one that is printed in your book, and I'll read it again for clarification. To approve the directive that no city staff member shall serve on any ad hoc committee, subcommittee, board, commission, and/or special project unless pre-approved by the city administrator or the city council. Further, the city administrator is hereby directed to notify the city council of any and all requests for such appointments or use of city staff. City staff will not be allowed to serve on city time without pre-approval. Counselor from Ward 1,
Yes.
Ward 2,
Yes.
Ward 3,
No, understanding the issue, I'd have to vote no.
Ward 4,
Yes.
Ward 5,
Yes.
Ward 6,
Yes.
Ward 7.
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 6 to 1.
Item number 15.
Item number 15, update on local redistricting of city wards. Requested action to receive an update from the city clerk on the proposed drafts for the redistricting of the city ward lines.
So moved.
And if it's okay, Mr. Mayor, I do have a quick handout that I'll pass out, and then I'll go to the center table to show you some maps on the screen.
Absolutely.
Mr. Mayor, if we could ask perhaps the clerk for our next presentation on this to have an enlarged map
Oh,
that
that
actually
was-
shows the
thank
city
you.
streets on it.
It does on the PDF on the website, but yes, I understand.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, but you've got to blow it up on a small screen, and the city does make a large map.
We do, and we'll be happy to get you, and we're happy to put those in your box tomorrow if that would help you, and you're welcome to pick it up at any time.
Never, no
Yes, we'll be
rush.
happy to do that, yes.
Before our next meeting when we have to decide.
Sure. Yes, thank you. So, Mr. Mayor and Council, as the information sheet explained, and as you may know, there is a clause in the state constitution that after every 10 years of this federal census, all municipalities that have multiple local districts are required to redistrict, which is also called reapportionment, or basically rebalance the ward lines to try to get to an equal balance to the extent that you can. The law does allow for a 10% differential. So we have worked with the city's GIS coordinator through Public Works. When we move the ward lines, we do try to keep them to the main artery roads to the extent that we can. You can see the chart in front of you that the city population from the census is 37,121. So divided by 7 wards comes out to 5,303. So we needed to try to, again, balance the wards for an equal balance to the extent that we can. We took other factors into place, such as the current residents of all elected officials, city council, and school committee members. One of the main factors we need to look at is seeing if we can, to the extent possible, try to match up with existing state boundary lines and county boundary lines, because if we don't do that, then it really creates this jigsaw puzzle of around the city, which means multiple ballot styles per ward, which can be confusing for the election workers, the voters, and so forth. So that was another priority. Another priority is to take a look at where the voting locations are located. So we have a lot of factors that we look into and take into account. The purpose for tonight is just to show you our draft plan, which was in the book and the numbers that I passed out to you tonight. And then if this looks okay for you, then the plan is to bring it for you. It is an ordinance amendment, so first reading on September 6th, second reading on September 20th. I will say that by state law, it needs to be done within 12 months of the state completing their lines. The state completed their lines September 27th of last year. So we do have a bit of a time crunch to get this done. If there's a major objection, we could certainly contact the state to find out a possibility of an extension. But that's basically why we're here tonight, is just to sort of get your basic feedback on this. Again, it's done every 10 years as a requirement. And with that, Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yes, questions from the council? Councilor Herman.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank you and your staff and all the city staff who did this. I know as you've explained, it used to be paper on the floor and markers, and thankfully technology has made it a bit easier, but I'm sure it's still a big effort. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Counselor Scott.
Thank you. I just want to concur with needing a larger map. I tried blowing it up, and then I still had to use with my bad eyes and my magnifying glass, and everything was all blurry, so.
Yes, I
Just so that we
apologize.
can see the lines, because I think between Councilor McCarthy and I, there's a significant piece there at the top that I'd like to just have a closer look at what's up there.
Sure, I'll speak with folks tomorrow. We'll get some larger ones printed out. We'll put them in your box, and I'll email you when they're in there.
I'm
so you
even
can-
willing to come in and take a look so that I have an understanding without you having to print the paper. I don't want to, but my eyes are not good.
Sure,
so,
we do
okay.
have larger copies in my office, so you're welcome to stop by and take a look at
Perfect.
those. But I know that you'd like to have your own copy as well, so we'll definitely have that taken care of for you.
Counselor LaChapelle.
Thank you. So you're saying you're trying to follow as many of the state lines as possible?
To the extent possible, sometimes that isn't always possible. What we also do is we don't start from scratch with the city ward lines. We start with the existing ward lines and try to adjust accordingly, moving the line a little bit out or in based upon the census blocks and the population within those census blocks.
All right. So because I'm familiar with mine,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just looking at Ward 4. And they took out a large chunk down in the bottom section and extended on the west side and made it larger. Would it just been smarter to just block that off down on the west side? You took some away and you added some to the other part.
Right.
So if you just left that and just took some from that other section.
Right, and we can take a look at it again. We tried to go with the major roadways, and what I don't have with me, Counselor, is the population numbers in each of the little yellow sections, but I can pull that because just because it looks large or small on the map does not really indicate what the population numbers are within that orange cross-section area. So I'll be happy to pull that for you and get that for you as well. That might answer some of your questions as to why we really had to do what we had to do.
Okay.
But I'll get that for you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Counselor Harriman.
Thank you. To that point, I believe at least that section that says portion of 5 becomes 4, I believe that's a new state house boundary there. So that may be why, on the west side of Ward 4 there, that may be why that line was there, because I was looking at that recently, and I believe that's a state house boundary.
All right, thank you, Counselor.
Further questions from the council? So you'll be, I don't need anything. I can live anywhere in the city. But you'll be printing up maps, I guess, for lack of a better term, and then put them in their boxes? Or?
Yes,
Okay.
so folks can take a look at that. And then if you have any concerns, you can let us know, and then we can look at readapting it and bringing it back to you if necessary. Yep.
Thank you, Madam Clerk.
Thank you.
And now we're up to reports and updates from the council. Councilor Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So we did have a school committee meeting last night, and I just wanted to give, at this point, we also had a school committee meeting on July 25th. A lot of what's happening right now is the approval of new principals, staff. I had told you about some that had happened the last time. There was some concern on the July 25th meeting that we were going to be short-staffed and not have enough staff. The superintendent had some concerns, had even spoken with the Department of Education at the state because of possibly looking at different scenarios on how to run school. We were, at that point, at the end of July, also short 18 bus drivers, which is significant. As of last night, I'm happy to report, and after the August 5th job fair that the HR department and the school department put together, we are now only in need of 3 bus drivers, and we hired almost 100 staff. which is phenomenal news. The teacher's contract, I think, being finished helped with that. The ed tech contract is now being worked on, and I hear it's very positive going forward. And last night, we approved the food staff contract, which gave a decent raise to the food staff employees, which were currently working well under what is considered almost a minimum wage. It was pretty significant. So I think that that helped with retention, and that was definitely needed for our schools to run properly. Last night, we also had some policy discussions around just reaffirming some of our school committee advisory committees, voting method for school committee members, nepotism, and abstentions. But I think that the biggest conversation we started having last night was the first reading of the new policy, which is going to be student use of cell phones and other electronic devices. Prior to our conversation last night, that particular policy hadn't been updated since 2012. And before that, 2016, with literally a very tiny little paragraph in respect to the use of cell phones in our schools. There was conversation last evening around suspending the rules and voting in the policy last night so that it was in place before school starts. But upon further discussion and looking at the calendar, we felt that I felt specifically that it was necessary to still have that conversation with community members and have that second reading and have that available conversation with community members and particularly parents to understand what this policy is going to say. And one of the things that we discussed when this new school year starts, parents get a piece of like an advisory form and a sign-off paper when it comes to the laptops that are used in our schools. And the school committee felt that it was important that with this new policy, we have that same protocol with the cell phones so that the parents completely understand what the policy is going to be in respect to where, when, and how, and the different grade levels of using a cell phone on our schools. One of the things that we were really focusing on trying to eliminate, and unfortunately, I see this as the way of the future of the world, but a lot of our disciplinary hearings and actions that have to be taken against students unfortunately involve recordings of these actions by other students. And so that was one of the things that we were trying to address, as well as distractions of the phones in the classrooms. I personally feel we shouldn't have any cell phones in the classrooms, but we're still having that conversation. We also, let's see here. We had a couple of conversations about some possible new intervention positions, but we're going to get some more information on that before that decision was made. I will say that after our tour at the Boys and Girls Club this evening, I think that that would probably be a really great place for, and I'm going to bring it up to the superintendent, of some of these, what we're talking about is students that are either suspended or expelled from school, an alternative program, but also keeping them in their educational process. Credit recovery, keep making sure that they're still doing their schoolwork and not just being expelled and doing nothing. I think that's an important piece, and that works towards graduation rates. We also had a discussion also about adding that to one of our next agendas, which was a serious discussion and possibly building another committee around graduation rates and how do we start talking about this and get this figured out. So I think that's another huge important piece. And that was it right now. It seems this time of year, it's generally buttoning up and getting ready for the school year. I know that our next meeting in September is probably going to be a very large one with a pretty good turnout. So we're going to be having that one instead of at the Dingley Building at Connors Elementary School to open it up to the public for those conversations. And that's that on that.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. Councillor McCarthy.
Yeah, we had an airport board meeting last Thursday, and I just wanted to update the council on the misrepresentation of what's going on at the airport that was in the article in the Sun Journal. It was incomplete information. If they'd have just looked at our board meeting on Thursday night, they would have seen that we've addressed all of the issues that were thrown out there in the article. Maybe next time they'll do their homework. Some of the things that were brought out was that Tom Ward, who runs an aircraft repair facility, was going to be out of work for 2 months, and that's not the case. He's been moved to the Elite hangar, where he's able to do his business, and he says it's going to be a little more difficult for him because some of his equipment is back at his hangar, but he will be able to function until the east ramp is back open. They also mentioned Mr. Platts and another gentleman that runs, not Life Flight, but Mercy Flights, that they were going to be relocating to Portland or something, and that's not the case. They're also going to be at the Elite hangar. The other aircraft that were in the hangars that are affected are going to get be able to use tie-downs at no cost to them on the other side of the airport, and they were allowed to drive their vehicles on the tarmac so that they can get to their planes, load up and unload when they have to. So the board did address all of the issues that were brought to them. There was some confusion over the whole project, and I think that's most likely due to the fact that we had a new manager in January, and this project has been on their books for a couple of years, and he made assumptions that were wrong, and, you know, it happens to all of us. So moving forward, we're trying to improve our communication with the pilots, and it's too bad that the airport got a bad rap by the newspaper, but thank you.
I have one more.
Councilor Scott, did you have something further to add?
Well, yes, besides the school committee, like I said earlier, the Senior Advisory Council will be beginning. We've got an email today to start our meetings on September 13th. Next week will be the full-day orientation for the Youth Advisory Committee. I'm excited about that. We've gotten a good response with that, and I think that's going to be a good day. And that's it. Sorry. Just wanted to add that.
Any other reports on that, Councilor LaChapelle?
Yes, in regards to LawPac, they received their report back, and we're having a hard time getting the committee together to review the report. So hopefully within the next 2 weeks, we'll have an executive session just to review the report. If not, our next scheduled meeting in September. So that's LawPac.
Any further updates from the council? And now, agenda item number 17.
Item 17, any other business councilors or others may have relating to Lewiston City Government?
Balloon Festival. That's it.
Yes, go to the Balloon Festival. Councilor McCarthy, did you have something?
I have a question about that. Wasn't there some sort of discussion about city council being Saturday night?
One of the events that initially was discussed, the entertainer ended up canceling. And that was somewhat last minute. I am working with the organizers to see with the replacement, do they still want to do that? So I will let you know as soon as I know.
Thank you.
Did you have something, Councilor Scott?
I was going to say, come Friday night, I'm working the taco salad tent for 3 hours for the Great Falls Balloon Festival, so come on down.
What nonprofit is that for?
Huh?
What nonprofit is that for?
It's for the Balloon Festival Committee itself. It's their tent.
Oh, they have a tent, and it's taco salad.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. With that, Madam Clerk, item number 18.
Item number 18, executive session to discuss real estate negotiations of which the premature disclosure of the information would prejudice the competitive bargaining position of the city. Requested action to enter into an executive session pursuant to Maine Revised Statutes Annotated Title I, Section 4056C, to discuss real estate negotiations of which the premature disclosure of the information would prejudice the competitive bargaining position of the city.
So moved.
Yes, may I have a motion? And Councilor Clement, followed by Councilor Pease. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Counselor from Ward 1?
Yes.
Ward 2?
Yes.
Ward 3?
Yes.
Ward 4? Ward 5? Ward 6?
Yes.
Ward 7?
Yes.
Motion passed by a vote of 1 to 0.
We will soon.
There's always one in the group